Want to welcome you back to day two. Just a reminder, you can put your questions in the chat or you can raise your hand to be acknowledged during the presentations. Otherwise, please keep yourself muted. All right, I'll turn things over to JIRN's president, George Shaler.
Hey, thanks, Jason. Hey, everyone. I want to welcome you back to day two of JIRN's 2025 Virtual Winter Conference. My name is George Shaler, and I'm the president of the JIRN Board of Directors. Once again, I'd like to thank the Bureau of Justice Statistics for their support, which makes this event possible. And I'd like to thank all the JIRN staff that have worked very diligently in organizing this meeting. We had a great turnout yesterday, and I'm hoping for the same thing today. If you were here yesterday, I hope you learned some skills and/or content that can help you in your respective roles. And as I mentioned yesterday, please let us know what you liked about the conference and what you didn't, and what we could do better in the future by completing the daily evaluation. So thank you for attending this event, and back to you, Jason.
All right, thank you, George. All right, I want to bring up our first presentation today. Let me get my speakers here. Okay. All right, to lead off today's program, we have a presentation on strategies for communicating criminal justice research to the public. We want to welcome Stephanie Kennedy and Senator Jeff Brandes. Stephanie is the policy director at the Council on Criminal Justice. She has spent more than a decade conducting research on amplifying well-being among justice-involved people and families. Throughout her career, she has had a focus on sharing research with policymakers and practitioners. Senator Brandes is a highly respected and accomplished leader who served in the Florida legislature from 2010 to 2022. Since leaving office, he has founded the Florida Policy Project, a not-for-profit, nonpartisan organization that researches best practices for better outcomes in a range of issues, including criminal justice. I'd like to welcome both of them and turn things over to Stephanie.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you, Senator Brandes, for being here with me. Thank you, everyone at JIRN and Statistical Analysis Centers across the country for being here. We are thrilled and honored to present to you today. And I'll get started by finding things on my screen. Okay. And I'm going. It's always so much easier when you're not doing it live. There we go. Fantastic. So today we're here to talk to you about research translation and why it matters and some strategies for doing it better. We know that you're experts in criminal justice research and data production. And so this is really about how to amplify your work and get what you're doing out into the national conversation in ways that are impactful to policy and practice. Oh. And so I'll start a little bit by introducing myself and the Council on Criminal Justice, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Brandes. So I'm Stephanie Kennedy, as Jason said, and I'm the policy director here at the Council. And I've been at the Council for about 3 years. Prior to that, I worked in academia for many years as a tenure track faculty member and then as a research director for an academic research institute. And through that work, I really honed my sense of why it's important to be able to talk about what we do and to put it into accessible formats for folks. And so I'm thrilled to now be a recovering academic and to be in the nonprofit, nonpartisan policy space and really kind of generate data-driven policy strategies. And so the Council on Criminal Justice is a think tank and an invitational membership organization. And so our kind of magic is that we convene task forces, commissions, and working groups to address some of the most challenging issues in criminal justice. So thus far, we've run about 10 of these groups, and we're currently working on a Women's Justice Commission focused on improving outcomes for justice-involved women across the system. We have a Veterans Justice Commission that just released their final set of recommendations focused on how to improve outcomes for veterans and really thinking about how to better serve that population. We've also addressed long prison sentences, policing, violent crime, and the impact of COVID-19 on correctional populations. Our goal is really to build a forum for common ground. And so through our task forces, we introduce facts and evidence into the dialogue of these incredibly diverse groups. So diversity on every level, from ideology, experience, point of view, race and ethnicity, gender, etc. And we come up with consensus for solutions that are actionable, feasible, and politically viable to address these issues, whether it's to address folks serving long sentences, whether it's to address special populations like veterans or women. And so here's some of the amazing work that we've already done. Please feel free to go to our website and look at some of the work that we've done. And I will say proudly that all of these art pieces were commissioned by currently incarcerated artists in the Oregon correctional system. And so I'll turn it over to Jeff to give us a little bit about who he is and what he does.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm Jeff Brandis, former state senator. I was in the Florida House for 2 years, and then I got out of there and went to the Florida Senate, spent a decade in the Florida Senate, where I worked a lot on insurance and a little bit on criminal justice reform until I got put on a criminal justice committee, where I listened to the story of an inmate in South Florida. You can look it up, who was taken out of his cell because he acted out. He was thrown in the shower. They turned the shower all the way up. The corrections officers left him there for a couple hours until he came back home, until they came back and found that he had died. I immediately kind of had this visceral reaction as I looked around the table, as I saw one legislator on their phone, the other one on their computer. I felt like I was on a plane at 30,000 feet with an engine out upside down and nobody at the controls. And so I had no criminal justice real background. I'm not an attorney. I had no real experience in being justice involved at all. But there's one provision in the Florida statutes that allows a legislator at any time to visit a prison unannounced. And you can take your state ID and walk up to a prison and get a tour that minute. And so I had found out that most legislators, in fact, hadn't been used in really years. So I started to I printed out a copy of the statute, walked to one of the prisons that was on my way home, and decided that I was going to start touring prisons. And so I started touring prisons and toured, frankly, dozens and dozens of prisons. And from that experience, I decided that this was an area of passion of mine, and that I was going to be. This was an area that I was really going to take on because I recognized so many of the challenges that were involved in Florida's prison system. Florida has about 85,000 inmates. We have about 11,000 of them, maybe 12,000 now, that are lifers. To put some context into that, that is more lifers than the entire state of Nevada has inmates. So we have a growing set of challenges, specifically around elderly inmates. Florida is a state with both 85% truth in sentencing and no parole. So we have some real challenges as it comes to just managing the population. And I think most states are struggling with the same amount of challenges: corrections officer challenges, staffing challenges, really elderly challenges. And so look forward to kind of sharing a little bit of conversation today about how we can better advocate and talk to legislators. The reason I started the Florida Policy Project was really born out of this idea that legislators lack, I think, a critical skill, which is curiosity. Right? I think that's a skill that many researchers have. They want to understand why. Legislators, just want the solution, oftentimes. And so we saw there's gap in the marketplace where think tanks, generally want to talk a little bit about a lot about the data, and not really focus on what is the current best practice in the country. And so all we do is work with academics across the country, practitioners across the country, really to identify nationwide best practices, figure out where Florida stands against those nationwide best practices, and bring those best practices to our state. It's kind of a way to shortcut the problem, to say, here's the solution. Whether you choose to adopt it or not is up to you, but ultimately, this is where we think based on the data and research, the best practice in the country is. And we found a lot of success in that. It kind of shortcuts a lot of the conversations. Legislators want to get to the best practice. They want to understand what's working and why it's working, and what the expected outcomes could be in their communities. So the Florida Policy Project was born out of that idea. And to this day, we research everything from issues on criminal justice and prisons to housing, insurance, and transportation. So those are the areas that we tend to focus on, but excited to be part of the conversation today. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So we want to start off a little bit by talking about why the translation of criminal justice research matters. I feel like I consider myself a pretty hardcore empirical researcher. I've run RCTs in prisons and communities across the country, and I've worked with data scientists, hundreds of data scientists, honestly. And so I think for a lot of folks, it's like the research should stand on its own, and the data are what the data are. But the translation piece is really important because it helps enhance understanding. Most people do not have your level of skill or ability. Wonderful people on this call. They cannot look at a complicated table or a really even like a dreadful government form and distill what's going on with it. And so research translation really helps us ensure that folks are understanding what's out there. And it's, as Jeff has said, it can drive policy change and really extend the impact of the work. I think research translation is important because it also elevates what you're doing so that you don't feel like you're just kind of crunching numbers in a dark room somewhere and putting things in a report that's immediately put on a shelf or put onto a web page now that nobody looks at. It can help get your work, the insights that you're gleaning from the data and your organization kind of onto the map and into the conversation. I think from a kind of broader standpoint, it also demonstrates the relevance of research. And I think research should be used to influence public opinion. And so I feel like are in a place right now where the evidence and the perception are vastly different on a number of key issues, and criminal justice is certainly one of them. And so the more cogent, accessible data that we can put into the conversation to help people understand what's going on, it's only going to influence their ability to feel like what they're hearing from an official source is true, and maybe question things that they're reading on the internet or that are designed to be a little bit more salacious. And so I wanted to get into kind of why us, right? Why me, and why Senator Jeff Brandes? Why do we care about this? And so my personal why, I feel like, as a tenure track faculty member, I wrote, I collected data from women in prison. I conducted an analysis. It took absolutely forever to collect the data. As well, it's hard to get into prisons. It's hard to do this work. It took a really long time. And I wrote the paper that was my paper, right? If we're thinking about that kind of 17-year odyssey of idea generation to implementation of a best practice, it takes about 17 years for that to happen. So I published my 17-year paper. And on ResearchGate, which I'm sure many of you, or if not all of you know, is kind of like a Facebook for nerds where you can go and access research items for free. The 3 or 4 heavy hitters in my area read my paper, and I realized that was it. These incredible scholars who had done groundbreaking work, who had paved the way for me to exist in this space and do this work, had read my 17-year paper. And then I was really left with the so what and the what's next. And it was at that moment, honestly, that I really started thinking about how to translate my work, whether it was on social media, through blogs or kind of more informational pieces, getting my results back to the women in prison that I had interviewed in a way that was accessible to them, and making moves to get out of academia and into this policy space where I could use research to actually make a difference. My half step was becoming a research director of an academic research institute, but I was a director of research dissemination. And so my entire job was writing, and I wrote 10,000 grants, but I also wrote papers, kind of white papers, technical briefs, one-pagers, so many tweets, so many LinkedIn posts, press releases, magazine articles, kind of like the conversation, if you've heard of that, as like an academic kind of expanded op-ed venture. I wrote a lot of op-eds. It was really like, how do we get this work that we're doing to conduct an intervention with folks across, or releasing from prison and coming home across the country? How do we get this into the world? And I feel like at CCJ, I started kind of cutting my teeth in the Academic Research Institute. And at CCJ, I think we do a really good job, although I'm open to any suggestions that y'all might have about how to make it more accessible, about ensuring that everyone can read our work. You don't need a PhD. You don't need to understand statistics or research and methods. You don't need to have a lot of time. You can sit down and understand what the essential elements of any product are. And I often think about my audience is like my mom and her pickleball team. And so when I'm reviewing products, I'm always thinking can my mom talk to her pickleball teammates about this shoplifting piece, about this report on shortening long prison sentences and what the public safety effects of that might be, about this piece that really goes through the kind of a statistical portrait of justice-involved women. And I think that's why I care so deeply about it. And I am excited I've had many collaborations with JIRN over the past couple of years, and I'm really excited that many of you are really eager to get into research translation as well, and maybe are looking for ways to do it better or to get started or even to wrap your minds around it, because it is not a way that any of us are trained, and certainly not many of y'all as data scientists. So now I will ask Jeff to share his why.
Well, I mean, I came quickly to the realization that the legislature pretty much runs thinks about criminal justice policy like the Ronco rotisserie chicken tagline of set it and forget it. This is how we have done things for decades. Nobody, Florida has term limits, and a lot of states obviously do, but many times nobody remembers why we actually did this to begin with. There isn't a context for the conversation. Most of what you find amongst the legislature, especially in Florida, is if you had a conversation, if you went and sat down with legislators today and you asked them the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor, they would get that wrong. If you asked them the difference between jail and prison, they would get that wrong. Oftentimes, it's like you're speaking Mandarin to somebody who speaks English and they don't understand the context of the conversation. And so it really is kind of bringing people back to the basics of how the system works, how the system functions. It is a 101 level education that they need before we can go into these deeper things of some of the challenges states face. And so it didn't take me long sitting on a criminal justice committee to realize that most of my legislators were not attorneys. Most of my legislators were never going to read anything that I put in front of them. And so everything I had to do was to be short to the point, and it helps if it has a tagline, right? Listen, 3 strikes you're out is a terrible policy with a great tagline. It is, there's a rule in the legislature that if you're explaining, you're losing, right? And so how do we find a way to get information to legislators? And so my why became, how do I use best practices as a way to identify the challenges and frankly where the successes are happening in the country, and how I can drive the legislature to best practices. I don't want them to have average, about half of all policy decisions are going to be below average, right? And so how do I get them to that top quartile policy decision? Well, we need to focus on what works best. They may settle below that, but if I'm aiming for that, that's where we've got to focus. So that's really my why and how I got passionate about it.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, I have not known Jeff for very many years, but he has many quality rants about this. So I'm very excited that he is joining us today. Okay, so we wanted to kind of frame this as providing you with some kind of strategies, some opportunities, some ways to get started, and then kind of digging into some of the work that you're already doing and identifying what's really working for it. And then at the end, we've got like time for Q&A, and I've got some questions for Jeff. I would love to field y'all's questions. Please use the chat at any time. It's a little hard to see it because in the full screen share mode, like the chat isn't super obvious, but I'm trying to pay attention there. So please fire away. Okay, so strategies for success, right? You have to know your audience. And so what is going to work well for your grantor, for folks who all have PhDs in statistics and have been doing this work for years, is not going to work for my mom and her pickleball team. And so as I understand it, most statistical analysis centers, your primary audience is to either the legislature of your state or to some kind of like formal governmental office that governs you based on a statute that created your existence. And so you may need to produce an 85 or 8,500 page report to satisfy that audience. And that's totally fine. But as you're doing that, think about what your other audiences are and see if you can create other products that better meet their needs so that your high level, really amazing granular work isn't just kind of lost in a sea of pages, lost in a sea of equations, it's just not presented in a way that folks who aren't as skilled as you can access, because people don't like to feel like they're stupid. And so if they read something they don't understand, they will immediately stop reading it and turn away. So in order to do that, to tailor your products, think about simplifying and summarizing. So it's really about bringing down language. And I feel like in my role as a director of research dissemination and my current role as a policy director, this is 90% of my job, is rewriting things, removing clauses. Anytime you've got a respectively in parens at the end of a sentence, it is too complicated for your average person to understand. So thinking about how to bring down your language so that it's clear and very, very intelligible, rather than, I feel like as many of us were trained to have beautiful prose, to have a lot of clauses, to give a lot of detail. We've also found, I did this in my previous position and I do it now, key takeaways are, I'd say essential to every product that you write. And these are concise nuggets that are going to summarize your critical points. 5 to 7 is pretty ideal. Have them at the top of your document. Most people won't ever get past that. So all of our documents at CCJ have key takeaways at the top. And it's meant for a busy legislative staffer, for a policymaker who wants to know something, for a mayor who's hearing a lot of hubbub about shoplifting, to be able to look at a research report and understand what's important without having to kind of get all in the weeds. The weedy material is great for your audience, and you can create ways for it to be accessible. And then oftentimes what we do is we take the really sophisticated methodological content, anything that's got an equation, and we put it in a PDF. We make that PDF very beautiful and we link it so that, when a former Bureau of Justice statistics director comes a knocking and wants to understand how this analysis was conducted, that person can be satisfied, but that your average person doesn't actually need that to be upfront and in their face. Should also think about crafting tight, high-quality conclusions. Most people read top and bottom, kind of like journal article rules. You read the abstract, you read the discussion, and you move on with your life. So I definitely give people what they want. Key takeaways and a good conclusion. I will say this, and many of you will not like this, I have learned. Spoon feeding and connecting dots is also essential. Most people cannot or will not make these conclusions on their own. And from the data science, again, hundreds of data scientists that I have worked with, I think folks get real uncomfortable about this because they feel like they're manipulating the data, they're telling a story that the data don't show, that the data should stand for themselves. But the issue is that nobody understands the data the way that you do. And so rather than pushing a narrative that is incongruent with your findings, simply giving people what the actual there is, right? Like, is there a there, and telling them what it is. So if it's high-level descriptive data, rather than having a lot of tables and a lot of interactive stuff, that's great for a sophisticated user, but maybe having a sentence or two, right? 60% of the folks who went through this program were female, 40% of folks, blah, blah, blah. Like really just giving people the nuggets that they need. Please avoid jargon, technical language, acronyms. I feel like FBI is okay. Beyond that, I even get a little bit uncomfortable with Bureau of Justice Statistics, although it's very hard to say. And so we do use that as an acronym, but go through your work and reduce acronyms as much as possible. Again, these things, folks don't like to feel stupid. And so when they hit this, it makes them feel like they don't understand, they're not in the in-group, and they're immediately no longer reading your piece. As I said, any kind of methods type content, anything with an equation in it, put these out of the way of your main analysis. Your more sophisticated folks are going to want it, and so you definitely want to provide it for them, but it shouldn't be in the face of your public-facing audiences. And in general, less is more. People don't read. Jeff said that legislators don't read, and that is true, but I'd say people don't read. People don't finish tweets. People don't read shampoo bottles. People don't read anything anymore. And so you really, like, no one will read an 85-page report unless there's someone like me who's like really interested in your topic and really keen to learn about something. But folks like that are few and far between. So we try to aim for getting our briefs to in the 5 to 7 page range, and we don't always succeed at that. But having those key takeaways, really thinking about, could this be a fact sheet? What other format could I put this in so that it's not as overwhelming as an 85-page report? In general, please don't make people do mental gymnastics. And so I read a lot of sentences that are like, you know, in recent years, female incarceration has dropped, and then there's a parens right from this to that respectively. And it's just so much clearer to say, like, from 2000 to 2020, the rate did this. Like really think about how to get things to people clearly. And I think that's what I mean by spoon feeding. I don't mean like fabricate something about your data, but do the work of connecting the dots for them. If at all possible, minimize the visual clutter of citations. If you can put them in endnotes and just get them out of the way. This way your reader can pass through, and then someone who is more sophisticated or more interested can follow that and go and read more. And definitely think about, as you're presenting these things on a web page, how to use white space and design to move readers through your products and keep them engaged so that they're wanting to continue to read more, to learn more, and to move from that product into other products on your website. Okay, I'm going to look for questions. I'm seeing none, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few like tools of the trade. So I'm not sure how much of this is possible given the kind of statistical analysis center context. But in general, you want to create some kind of a visual brand. And so at CCJ, you see we have the purple, we have the turquoise. We use a lot of white space. I would say if you are in a place where you are able to make such decisions, think about choosing a color palette and standardize it. So standardize it to your website, standardize it to all of your products, standardize it to every PowerPoint that you give, all of your letterhead, really making it clear that these results, this report, this product comes from your organization. You can definitely use visual accessibility best practices. You can Google those. You can consult with design folks. Always ensure that your logo is visible. This is something that I see a lot of people forget. Your logo should be on everything you do, every PowerPoint slide, every chart or graph that you make. Ideally, you'll be able to embed a link back to your website into that, because people are going to grab one of your say like a line chart. They're going to grab a line chart from your analysis and they're going to put it on their blog, or they're going to tweet about it, or who knows, they're going to put it in their class, their kind of like course design. And if your logo is not there, then nobody knows that you did that incredible work. So logo, always visible, so important. And then I feel I've used this for many years. Provide links to pages that are internal on your website and use endnotes for anything external. So I know that we're in a hyperlinky kind of place. I love a hyperlink, but you want to keep people on your page and on your website. Anytime you give them a link to something else, they're going to click it, and then all of a sudden they're reading about something else and they've totally forgot that they were reading your product, and they will never come back, or they might, but likely not. So try to make sure that you're keeping people on your products and on your pages. Infographics. So y'all do data all day long. I'm sure you're interested in infographics. Infographics are a great way to display data quickly and easily in ways that are digestible to folks who are not highly sophisticated, right? My mom and her pickleball team can totally understand what this chart is telling them. It's a way to really tell a story through your data. And so most of you have trend data. And so being able to show the size of your correctional population, or the number of people who were killed in action, or whatever your data point is, not just for 1 year or 1 quarter, but over time, is often a really powerful way to set a stage. But make sure that you're keeping these charts and figures real easy to digest, because again, your audience is likely not very sophisticated, and you don't want them to misunderstand what you're trying to tell them. We find that one-pagers are really helpful. And so when we have major reports, we put out a one-pager. And so it's often a two-pager, right? 1 page front and back. This is designed to be a really simple, easy document, something that's boiling everything down into some top lines, something that you can bring when you're doing Hill visits, bring to your legislators, bring to your policymakers, bring to anyone at a kind of speaking engagement that you can email to folks. And so I have an example here. I think our most highly clicked on piece at the Council on Criminal Justice is a one-pager that we did that summarizes the results of a 600-page BJS recidivism report. The report is old. The one-pager is also old, and it still continues to get a tremendous amount of traffic. So think about how you can get your information to people, because people are hungry for it if they understand what they're looking at. Q&A is also, we don't use this a lot at CCJ. I use this at my last position, but kind of creating something next to a product, if you're laying it out on a website, that's asking questions that you're pretty sure a common reader would have, and then answering them for them. These can be real conversational. And if you don't feel that you're, oh, something just happened. Okay. Let me go back. Oh, okay. So I've also got something in the chat. Sorry. Oh, okay, this is a great question. So how do you balance displaying statistical data with recommendations or Q&A that may introduce some bias? This is great. I think coming together as a team and really understanding what are these data saying? What are we trying to do with this product? And then shopping it around to folks. So send it to your mom and the pickleball team. I don't know why that's happening. I'm not clicking. And see if folks are understanding what you're trying to present in a way that is neutral and not introducing either unintended bias or a narrative or a perspective that you're not wanting to have there. I think it really is about shopping it out. And so as with the Q&A, use experts, right? You're connected to you. I know that most of your staff is small. It's like 4 to 5 folks in each of these statistical analysis centers, but you're connected to a web of others through JIRN. And you're also connected to people in the community, in your legislature. Put things in front of people and really get their perspectives on it. I think people are generally pretty honest, whether they think it's leading or too complicated or whatever. It's a great question. Okay, I did click that time. So social media is what it is. I'm not the world's biggest fan, but it is a way to get your data into the conversation. It is a necessary evil, I feel. We only do X and LinkedIn at CCJ, for which I am grateful. If you were just going to pick one, honestly, I would just pick LinkedIn. Is with a social post, pull out 1 or 2 key findings. Anytime you are posting on social media, you must have an image, a picture, a social card. And by a social card, I mean these little kind of things. You can make them in PowerPoint. Always, always, always have an image or a social card. People respond to images, particularly of faces, and they're far more likely to click that more button, to click your link, and to linger on your content. With that, if it's just text, they're just going to keep on scrolling. I mean, this is like everybody's life right now. So the picture is a way to stop them. Use hashtags to get your content in front of audiences. Again, I know that's annoying. But look around at other folks in your sphere, at other folks who are talking about criminal justice, and use those and start collecting kind of an arsenal of hashtags that you then copy at the bottom of your post, like hashtag criminal justice, hashtag whatever. It pulls it up for people who are in that sphere. It makes it more likely that your post will get in front of their eyeballs. You can also do videos. So people, again, love faces. YouTube and TikTok, real popular. In general, I would say these should be very short. 5 minutes would be extremely long. I put up some examples of 2 that we have here that are just, one is like one of our commission members for the Women's Justice Commission, Pamela Wynn, talking about her experience and why she wants to be part of this commission and the work that we're doing. And another of our former director of the Veterans Justice Commission, kind of like giving a goodbye announcement as he's moved on to be a general of, I forget the exact position, forgive me, in West Virginia. But you could also do this to explain your research findings. You could have little 1-minute kind of either Q&A with 2 people, one person talking through a report, that shows what the key takeaways of your data and findings were. And then you can put these on social, you can put these on your website. And these actually don't need a tremendous amount of skill to do this. So Jim is in his house, Pamela's in her house. People can record these on their phones and then send them to you. And there are apps now. My 11-year-old can splice together things and create, like, with transitions. She can do it in literally a minute. Things that used to take a graphic designer, I don't know, 3 weeks to do. So it's not a huge lift. There's a learning curve, but once you get through that, it's not a huge lift. Okay, let me see. Can you talk more about what audiences you're reaching through LinkedIn? Woof. Gosh, who knows? So I think through LinkedIn, the council has a big LinkedIn presence. And so the council's LinkedIn presence, my personal LinkedIn presence, I feel like my personal LinkedIn presence is unclear. I get a lot of invitations from people. I generally say yes, unless I'm real sure they're just going to try to sell me something. And with the council, I think they have about 11 or 12,000 people following them, which for a research, policy-based research organization or research-based policy organization feels substantial. But we're reaching other folks who are doing advocacy in this space, doing policy and research work in this space. We get a lot of cold calls for folks wanting to participate in our task forces. We get folks who were formerly incarcerated and want to give back and be part of what we're doing. It's not, I won't say that like being on social is the thing that is going to make your organization come into the national conversation, but it's a way to establish your brand and establish yourselves as the authority on criminal justice data in your space, as you are. So it is a way to, I think really enhance the way that your organization and your work are perceived and get your work out in front of folks so that then people start seeing you as the go-to source. When they're hearing conflicting stories, when the internet is telling them whatever, they're like, okay, I need to go to the Idaho Statistical Analysis Center and really see what's going on in my state. Okay, so some other opportunities that are a little bit more complex. Webinars, LinkedIn Live events. We do a fair amount of webinars. We get a lot more traffic on webinars than on the LinkedIn Live events. But these are great ways to assembling a panel of folks to talk about an area. And you can use your report as stage setting. So CCJ has the crime trends report. And so we've often had webinars where Ernesto Lopez, who is the primary author of those, will kind of give the findings of the report, and then we'll have a conversation with policymakers and electeds in the state about what's going on in their jurisdictions and what they're doing about it. Then you can you record these events, post them on your website, write a little high-level summary. And it just creates a feedback loop of really enhancing your brand and establishing you as the experts in this field. News coverage, earned media, which is again hard. When you have a new report out, reach out to journalists who cover your topic area. I know not all of you are associated with universities. Universities often have a communications department that I assume is giving some amount of their time to helping y'all out. But you can reach out to journalists directly. Your comms office can be very helpful if you have access to one. And some kind of, like a regional press club might consider hosting you at a meeting to present on your topic, especially if it's new data for your state that's germane to the conversations that journalists are having. Journalists, again, are very busy, and they are people who love to read, but that don't have time to read. And so having those key takeaways, boiling things down for them, helps them write stories that are grounded in facts and evidence. And then we'll link back, according to a new report by whatever Statistical Analysis Center, and it creates, again, that brand and authority. Op-eds are another great way to get your content out into the world. And again, I'm not really sure what some of you or all of you may be restricted from doing this based on kind of how you're statutorily designed as statistical analysis centers. But in general, news outlets are eager to publish content, especially that is going to be situated in the here and now, something that folks are talking about now. So look for opportunities to fashion pieces that really highlight your work. So if there's something new happening and your new report can shed light on it, then you can write an op-ed that helps clarify, right? So instead of introducing bias or introducing a narrative, it's like, actually, here's what's happening. The criminal justice population is down over XYZ years, as you can see in our new report. And I've got some examples here from CCJ and from the Florida Policy Project. And podcasts, there's a podcast for everything. There's not a ton of great criminal justice podcasts that aren't like salacious true crime kind of things. This top one is the BJA podcast. A couple others I just pulled from Florida. But there are audiences that are eager to hear the results of your new reports. Okay, so I wanted to do a little show and tell, and I'm going to need your help in the chat for this. So we're at about 47 minutes. We likely won't get to all of these, but I wanted to kind of go through some of the amazing work that you're already doing and identify what's really working, right? Like, what do you see that you like, that you're connected with, that feels relevant, and useful? And then I'm going to provide one tweak or loving opportunity for growth to how to amplify that. And so let me come off of here and bring back up. We're going to start with a piece from Illinois. Okay, so here is an Illinois juvenile justice system report. Okay, so we've got a little abstract up here. We've got an introduction. All those citations are out of the way. Got background. We're scrolling. We're learning amazing things here. Got methods. We're scrolling. We're learning so much great stuff. It's all so rigorous and thoughtful. We come to a figure. And it shows us juvenile arrest trends, right? From calendar year 2018 to 2022. It's easy to understand. I totally get what's happening here. Here's a slightly more complicated one, but I'm still here with you. This is like looking fantastic. Okay, so what are y'all seeing here that you think works? What do you like about this? Clear graphs, 100%. Got a pie chart and it adds to 100. High fives. Other things that y'all think are really working here. Text is broken up by visuals, right? So it's not just like a wall. The comparison is real easy to understand. Yeah, beautiful fonting, nice sections, nice visuals. This is a lot of content, right? I'm already on figure 13, but I'm not exhausted as I'm going through. I think this is fantastic. It's super rigorous. It is so clear that y'all know exactly what you're doing. Yeah, option for a PDF version. I love that. I hate designing it because it's really hard to solve problems in two different ways for web-based and a PDF, but I love it when someone else can do that for me. This is like an amazing, clear, beautifully displayed academic paper. My loving tweak would be adding some, I know that an abstract, right, is up here, but this this wall of abstract text, I think people find a little intimidating. And so just having some key takeaways, that's like, here you go. This is what happened with juveniles from 2018 to 2022. This thing went up, this thing went down, and just really like kind of spoon feeding it for folks. And then your more sophisticated folks will punch in and be really excited to read all of this. The methods here don't, like, I think they're okay. It's a lot of methods. And so it's all very clear to me. What you could do is just have a little paragraph here that kind of summarizes and then links to a separate methodology document that has all of this, so that folks who are really wanting to know about variable choices and et cetera can get there, but that everyone else gets a high level of, here's the data, here's the sample, here's the key variables of interest, and moving on. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, this is very true. This is an amazing directional over here, so that if you're not interested in the methods or the methods scare you, you can go right to the results. It's pretty great. Okay, let me grab another one. Okay, so this is Tennessee, 2022 use of force. So this is your classic report, right? PDF report. And so we have, of course, the required front page. We have a nice introduction here that sets the stage. We have a methodology that is real gorgeously short. And then we get into text and figures. So what do y'all think is working here? Let me open my chat. So what I'm seeing that I really like is that the colors are always the same, right? So red always means deadly force, purple always means serious injury, blue always means firearm discharged. So in every single graph, it's always the same. Fantastic. Text isn't too long. Yeah, I love having these little blurbs. There's a lot of visuals, and then there's some sentences that tell people what they're looking at. And also, I think the sentences offer the percent too. So you've got a lot of counts here, and then you're giving people the percent so that they don't have to do that math and figure out, oh, what's the, how many people were under the, between the age of X and Y. You're already doing that for them. Yeah, the short lead in was really good. Okay, and that's it. Okie dokie. So my loving tweak opportunity for growth would be that these colors, the red, purple, and blue on that black background are really, like, my eyes struggle to focus on it. And so if you can pick more muted colors, then I think your visualizations will really pop and people will be able to stay on them and focus on them more. And I think it's especially evident when you have these kind of, multiple bars all together, where it's like the red and the purple are just hard for my eyes. But outstanding. Okay, what time is it? Let me grab. One. Okay, so here is, Wisconsin domestic abuse data. Okay, so we start with learning about statutes. We get some methods section here. We get a disclaimer. Love that. And we get, if you have stumbled upon this page and are actually looking for help and resources, please go here. I love that. Love that very much. And then we have this amazing suite of Tableau dashboards. So we've got dashboards down here, and then we've got tabs up here, and a little directional here, right? Download a PDF or image by clicking the download button at any time. And we've got definitions and all of this kind of real technical stuff down here at the bottom. So what do y'all think is working here? Have I exhausted you? Great short intro. May have been for the last one. But great short intro here too. Okay, so I think there's a lot of great stuff that are happening here. And I love this data transparency. You're giving people so much ability to really dig in and get into it. Yeah, so even if you're only looking for one thing, if you're looking for law enforcement data, then you can go and get that, and then you can see like, oh, I could also get charging data. I could also look at these other things. I could cut it in this different way. My loving opportunity for growth would be that you're right. So it's broken up by tabs. It's not so overwhelming as a single dashboard. This is a lot of data dashboard. And I don't know if my mom and her pickleball team could make any sense of it. And so I wonder if pulling out some high level, like the trends 2013 to 2018, and just having like for each little section, law enforcement reporting, just pulling out one thing and then telling people what they can find below. So in law enforcement reporting, right, like you can find data on number of incidents, relationship between perpetrator offender, like whatever it is, and really giving folks what the directional that they need to understand how to punch in. Is the data up to 2018 only on this dashboard? Yes. And that may be when the statute ended. Yeah, exactly. I would also, anytime y'all are putting in statutes, I know that you have to do this. It might be helpful just to have something that tells folks what the statute is, because I don't know what Wisconsin statute 968.075 parentheses 9 means. So it's like under this statute whereby we have to publicly release data on intimate partner violence or domestic abuse cases. We're presenting data, blah, 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 that kind of thing. But yeah, I think this is really excellent. And I love the attempt to democratize your data by putting it on Tableau and really letting people dig in. Okay. I had a few others, but I talked for too much time. I'm sorry. I said 75 minutes was too long, and I was incorrect about that. In general, everything I looked at, y'all are doing an amazing job, and you're really thinking about how to get your work in front of folks in meaningful ways. And so I want to move into kind of like a Q&A portion here, and I have some questions for Jeff. But also, as I'm asking, I'm going to start with a question for Jeff to get y'all started. If you have other questions, please throw them in the chat so that we can address them. Okay, so Jeff. So I know you feel like you've already really talked about kind of the shift that you made from being a policymaker to being like a data-driven policy shop guy, and these moments in government where you felt like better data could have really like changed an outcome. Do you have a sense of where policymakers tend to struggle the most when it comes to understanding or applying data? Like, what are the common pitfalls that folks at Statistical Analysis Centers could help overcome?
I think one of the bigger challenges is that, you're providing all of this data on things that may not be the current issue of the current crisis of the day to solve, right? And so it's important that we provide them, not only the great work that you're doing, but we're actually helping solve a current problem that they're facing. And one of the bigger challenges you see is that look, like for example, Florida has this huge aging inmate population, and the healthcare expenses of that population are astronomical, and somebody's going to send me a data, on why I should be working on parole. Well, that might be true, and that might actually ultimately help my elderly inmates. But how do I draw that connection together, right? And how do I tie that together for legislators that this is a potential solution that they can look into?
Yeah, that's great. And I'm thinking about like, even in like when you're presenting age data, like for a lot of the visualizations I saw, it's count data, and I understand why you're doing that, and potentially that's your mandate. But like adding that percent there too, And then maybe having a sentence or two that's like, you know, the incarcerated population in Rhode Island is aging, period, right? In 2000 or 2015, whenever your data start, you know, 15% of folks were over the age of 55, and today, you know, 40% of folks are over the age of 55, and really helping provide a policymaker with like a digestible bullet that they could use to say like, hey, Florida, I know we abolished parole 30 years ago, but now folks have been stacking up and we need to figure out how to get them out of our prisons and into nursing homes and hospitals.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to break it apart. You know, it's all well and good to put all of the data out, but it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right? There's a reason that if you watch the infomercials on, you know, feeding African children, they usually focus on one child. They don't focus on a million children. They focus on one. How do we take the data and create a story from that? What's the personal example? How do I personalize it for legislators? And I think, you know, overwhelmingly, the data you saw is an aggregate amount of data, and it's not tailored, it's not personalized. You know, if I could take one inmate's healthcare records, and I could show, even if I anonymize it and say John Doe, but you know, we're spending $200,000 a year on healthcare for John Doe, and he doesn't qualify for Medicare or Medicaid. You know, this 25-year-old John Doe, we would have spent $20,000 or $25,000 for his entire incarceration, like his year of incarceration. This one is not going to commit new crimes, and yet we're spending $200,000 on his healthcare. This is, you know, how do I personalize it? How do I tell a story of one thing with that data? I think that's really important.
It is really important.
And I think it's counterintuitive to what, you know, data professionals tend to focus on.
Indeed.
They're not used to focusing on one, the story of, this is the example I'm going to use here. They're used to focusing on the aggregate.
Right. And so to make that more comfortable, I think for the folks on the call, what you could do is use your aggregate data to create a statistical portrait and then partner with someone who has a personalized story. And that's where like the op-ed comes in, where these kinds of more narrative pieces of here's what's happening in our state, our population is aging, their healthcare costs are increasing, and then you have a story from the loved one of an incarcerated person or from a correctional, you know, a state correctional administrator, whatever it is. And that's how you make data persuasive. And so for y'all, I think it's about making sure that the data are accessible. And so that someone like Jeff can come in and say, okay, I totally understand what's happening we're both in Florida. In Florida, I know who's there, who's in prison, what their needs are, what their charges are, how long they're going to be there. And I have a sense of what their expected length of stay is. And I can start using those data to tell a narrative, right? To advocate for policy change, something like reintroducing the concept of parole in our state. Okay, we've got some questions in the chat that I skipped before. Thank you, Susan, for highlighting them for me. So I've got one, does your organization work on gang-related crimes and policies to decrease such crimes? And the answer for both Florida Policy Project and Council on Criminal Justice currently is no. We have not really forayed into that. For the Council on Criminal Justice, I think our closest would be the Violent Crime Working Group and the 10 Essential Actions to Reduce Violent Crime, which were adopted by the Department of Justice in the Violent Crime Reduction Roadmap. And so you can check that out on our website. And then another question about the metrics that CCJ uses to measure success in this area. And this is tough, right? We use the metrics available like impressions, right, on LinkedIn, which is the number of eyeballs that are you put your posts in front of. We do open rates on our emails, clicks, we track website pages, particular, both in general and particular pages, are people clicking on this report? If we post this report as a PDF or as a web report, where do people click more? What do people want? Which is why we've sort of abandoned the PDF. Apologies to everyone who wants one, because no one was clicking on the PDFs and everyone was clicking on the web reports. And we're trying to find ways, I think, through especially the earned media, of connecting instances where our organization and the data that we've put out have been brought into news stories and kind of more challenging to measure, have influenced policy in some way. Probably the most direct example of that would be we wrote a model policy framework for a Veterans Justice Act that was picked up by ALEC, the acronym for which I cannot remember right now.
American Legislative Exchange Council.
Thank you, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And we're tracking to see, we're conducting education on that. We are not a lobbying organization, but like tracking to see whether states can pick it up to really help enhance the way that they're identifying veterans who are coming into the criminal justice system and thinking about enhancing the types of interventions that they provide for that group. Okay, so it's a great point from the senator. All the SACs are reporting lots of data that can inform current policy discussions, but the particular data point for a given issue might be buried and people wouldn't know it's there. And so I would think about, as you're writing your reports, as you're coming up with your key takeaways, be aware of the conversations in your community as you are, right? We all know that we've had I feel like if you're thinking about crime, we're thinking about shoplifting and we're thinking about carjacking. And most of you on this call likely know that those two things are challenging to measure using our existing NIBRS data, and that organized retail crime is not something that we can measure in that way, right? It's like an investigative label. It is not a data point. And so as you're coming up with, as you're like scanning through your folks every year, you could be tracking what's going on with carjacking in my state, in my jurisdiction, in my largest city. What's going on with shoplifting? Are we seeing that reported shoplifting is coming up? And then being thoughtful about, like, is it because shoplifting is increasing, or is it because reporting is increasing because awareness has increased? And I think helping to set the stage for those conversations and really give people what they want. Yeah, like especially in looking at like the Tableau dashboards, like they're beautiful. I think they're so impressive. It's such a wealth of data, and for a sophisticated person, that I think like they can get in there and manipulate things and run queries and be really happy and learn so much. But maybe above that, thinking about, here are some like broad, high level trends that will help Jeff and his legislature make decisions about this key issue in our community. And those might be static. You might review those every 3 months and see if there's new insights to pull out. But really trying, and this is what I mean by spoon feed, like really trying to spoon feed things. And then as you're doing outreach, connecting with folks in your legislature to see what kind of data would be helpful for them. And Susan notes that altmetrics has been recommended by researchers. This is new to me. I let our communications folks do this. I am out of the impression game, mercifully. Okay, I think we got time for one more. So we've all seen cases where data is cherry-picked to push a narrative. So how can policymakers make sure that they're using data responsibly and not just to justify a decision that they've already made? What do you think, Jeff?
I would take you back to the 2020 Sheriff's Report on 85% in Florida. And I will lead you a line from that report, because I pulled it up, where it said there's a piece in quotes that says, let me see it here. The data could not be clearer. Florida's 85% truth in sentencing rule was coupled with the state's incarceration model has resulted in a lower crime rate and lower incarceration rate than many other states. That's the quotation. Now let me read you the second sentence of the conclusion by the people who actually wrote the report. The extended literature on the effects of truth in sentencing is mixed, period, end quote. Right? So yes, people cherry pick reports. Yes, people come up with statements like the data couldn't be clearer, when clearly, if you read the report, the data is totally mixed. And so this is, I think, highlighting somebody who has has cherry picked the quote, which is not from the data scientist, but actually a sheriff quoted in the report. And this is kind of what we're up against, and this is how people utilize those types of that type of information. And I love this because I love pointing this out to the sheriffs that they're producing reports that say one thing and as a sheriff, but the research actually shows it isn't clear at all. And I think that's I think we can bend this way, and people are always going to cherry pick reports. They're always going to cherry pick data that they want to use that kind of gets them to their thesis. Ultimately, we're not going to be able to fight all of that. I think it's important that you focus on the key things. We've got amazing tools now. Running things through ChatGPT is not cheating. It is asking ChatGPT to come up with slogans for your research that are catchy and that are interesting, are absolutely viable to be, at least in my world, because ultimately, look, it doesn't matter if I wrote it. If it's a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, like, it doesn't matter, right? We want this to be read. We want it to be focused on. And I think we've got to focus on not only best practices in research, but best practices in explaining research to legislators, or express practices in reaching our audience.
That is a fantastic point. Yeah, I think there are, we have to be thinking about what are the ways that we can get this. And I think it is like trial and error and a lot of like A/B testing of what's going to work. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left. We have a question from Geraldine about data collection quality and how this influences. Yes, I'm sure the data you receive from your jurisdictions is in varying forms of goodness. Some of it is going to be really high quality and clear, and it's going to have QC and QA checks having been done before you, and some of it is going to be real thin, depending on the skill and time bandwidth of the people who are collecting it. And so I think y'all definitely think about what you have, and then if there are quality issues that you're noticing, and I would say like completeness issues that you're noticing between often more well-resourced and urban districts and less resourced rural or tribal districts, those are things that you can say, like, it appears that crime is clustering blah 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 in this way, or crime is going up or crime is going down, but our more the urban rural divide is a little bit less clear, and I think in your mission really is to take the data that you're given and see how you can present it to folks, understanding that it's not perfect, understanding that it may need to be revised, but trying to get it out there so that it can be useful to driving conversation, to driving policy, and to giving folks what they need. And I know that y'all on this call, Jeff is all about best practices, 100%, and I love that. I'm all about them too. I know that you can't get to best practices with a lot of your data. Your data are highly descriptive, but you can provide the kind of like the solid foundation of what's happening, what's going on in your state, in the community, that then someone can take and identify what a best practice is. Okay, we're seeing that carjacking has plummeted. What policies have changed in our areas hardest hit by this? What drove this change? And could that be replicated in either other jurisdictions and other states, et cetera? I honestly thought 75 minutes was way too long, but apparently I could talk about this forever, and I apologize. But thank you all so much for having us. Thank you so much, Senator Brandis, for taking time out of your life and your running of a really important organization to talk to us about how to break through the noise and get amazing data into the hands of folks like you who can use it to make positive change in our communities.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. And thank you, Stephanie and Senator Brandis, for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it. Welcome back, everyone. Knowing how involved SACs are with NIBR's data, we wanted to hold this roundtable to discuss challenges related to data collection, building communication between states, and the future of NIBRs. We would like to welcome our moderator, Kimberly Martin from BJS's Law Enforcement Incident-Based Statistics Unit. Kim will help us navigate this discussion today. The roundtable will feature Paul Perrone from Hawaii and Caitlin Rines from Ohio. Kim, I'll turn things over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that brief introduction. As Jason said, my name's Kimberly Martin. I apologize. I might lose my voice a little bit, getting over the flu that apparently everyone seems to have these days, at least at our offices at BJS. What I would like to do today is I looked over these slides from yesterday and the really rich conversation and detailed conversation that the Georgia SACs and Ohio and Hawaii and had about the NIBR's data, both data quality, policy issues, things like that. And so today's discussion, we're going to kind of continue that. And I have a couple of questions to kind of lead our discussion topics. And, Jason, I wasn't sure if you guys just wanted me to start right off with a few of the questions that I have. I think we have, an hour?
Sure, that'd be great.
And I'm just so folks know why I'm the moderator here. I've been with BJS for almost 12 years. I am a statistician in the Law Enforcement Incident-Based Statistics Unit at BJS. And we're essentially like the NIBR's unit. And what we do is we work in concert a lot with the FBI, both to produce the national estimates based on NIBR's, and also to do our own analytic reports that use the NIBR's data. And Jason, can I just ask really quick, can folks see my video?
Yes.
I can see you. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. I'm having a couple of technical issues here. I can't actually see myself, which is actually just fine. And so I've been working with NIBR's ever since I came to BJS. And I don't just work with it at the national level. I work with it mostly at the state and local level. That is kind of my bread and butter. So I'm very excited to be here. I say this all the time. We as a unit could not do our job without our state partners. I have learned more about NIBR's from folks at the SACs and at the state UCR programs than I think I could have. I mean, it's just, they're instrumental. So some of the questions we have, NIBR's is at an interesting inflection point right now. Last year, we had about 83% population coverage in the US, which is great. We're getting there, but we still have some challenges. So the first question I wanted to kind of open up for Hawaii, and I'm not sure if anybody prefers who answers first, if we want to go state by state, but one of the key questions I have, and I guess we can start with Hawaii. Could you just briefly describe the work being done at your SAC with the NIBR's data? What questions motivate the work that you do with the NIBR's data? And what have been the results of that in terms of reactions to it, any sort of policy implications? So if you could just briefly describe, and we can start with Hawaii, how you work with the data.
Hi, well, good morning, everybody, from our perspective. My name is Paul Perrone. I'm the SAC director and the state UCR program manager in Hawaii. I've served in this role since 1996. I think I've been around about as long as Jason Trask. I think he and I started around the same time. And also, I'd just like to highlight my staff who are both with me here today. Michelle Masters, Dr. Masters, you heard from her yesterday. And Zoe Kaniakua is our data scientist, stalwart data scientist, and UCR research analyst, and is a new thing for us, working with dashboards and working with NIBRS data. So both are relatively recent employees and have been really great in these roles. So they're both here with me today too. Our program is at the point where the analysis and public presentation of NIBRS data now is at the forefront. We're in a unique situation. We've been working really with Search, who I see David Roberts, a former executive director, is on board here today, and perhaps some others. We've worked with Search since the 1990s on NIBRS, even though for the first 20 years we didn't actually do NIBRS. So we did a lot of readiness studies when the initiative the FBI initiative to sunset the summary reporting system and go to NIBRS was made. We immediately began working with Search, and our department outside of the UCR program has worked with Search for many decades as well. And we're members of the Open Justice Broker Consortium, which is a sort of a big annual bill, but our whole department covers it. It allows us some TA hours from Search. So we're sort of in a unique situation. As many of you may have known, we've been slowly building our repository and our dashboards, originally with NCSX money and now with our SJS grants each year, to sort of build out a piecemeal data repository and now our dashboards, because our overriding concern from day one has been our probable inability to pay huge annual maintenance and licensing fees bills, tens of thousands of dollars a year. We're a very small SAC. We have very small amount of state general funds. So we're limited, and it really scared the heck out of us to think that in perpetuity, we need to come up with $30,000, $40,000 a year to pay for a licensing fee that we don't necessarily even get anything other than that out of. So we started working with Search, and it's been a slower process. As I said, we built a proprietary open source data repository and now dashboards in that fashion, working with them. I believe the state of Maine works with Search as well. Search works with a lot of states, but we've really been hand in hand with them from the beginning. So I have to acknowledge that and note that our path has been probably different from everybody else's. So I could go back through the process and the history of it, but where we're at now is we have a repository. We have 100% coverage in our state, which means 4 police departments, but we do have one of the 800-pound gorillas, the City and County of Honolulu Police Department, one of the top 20 departments in the nation population-wise. So that's a real big one that the FBI is keenly interested in. So we are a 100% coverage state. We do have a repository. We do have a really cool, sophisticated, slick internal private dashboard that we use for our analytical purposes. But I think one of the later questions is going to talk about this. A bit cumbersome and unwieldy to launch on the public. I think it would be very complicated. You have to know, it presumes a lot of knowledge about NIBRS to work with it. So we are now, the big task before us is to come up with a simplified version that includes everything that NIBRS has to offer, but in a way that everybody, an 8th grader doing his homework can figure out, or even a politician might be able to, with a little extra help, figure out. So that's where we're at today. I wanted to preface some of our background, and I hope I answered your question as to where what the issue is before us now is a better understanding and presenting NIBRS data to a lay audience in the clearest, most concise fashion.
The dissemination piece is vital, even more than ever right now in our current funding and policy environment. It sounds like you have, so just so I'm clear, so you have a public-facing dashboard, and then you've got like the hot rod version behind the scenes.
I'm reluctant. I'm sorry to jump. I'm reluctant to highlight. I wasn't even going to mention. Yes, we do have a public dashboard, but it was made several years ago using a free open source tool. It was just an attempt, and we've left it up. We maybe should have even taken it down. But if anybody has seen that's not really our dashboard. Our public dashboard it's the main product that will come out of our current SJS grant period. So that's what we're working on now. We have a pretty rinky-dink dashboard now, but that's not really it, and I prefer not to spend a whole lot of time talking about it.
I understand completely. We have we have a dashboard ourselves at BJS, and it is a constant work in progress. How to balance the complexity of NIBRs with making it simple for a broad audience. Um, and so your work with NIBRs, I know you guys were, you were certified not that long ago, so I'm not sure. You may have already answered this question, but how has your work with NIBRs been changing over time? Is there particular content areas or objectives that have that are front and center that you want to do in your state with the NIBRS data? So for example, I'm in Virginia, and there are certain crimes that we're tracking, much more carefully, maybe. Like, so for example, I was tracking carjacking in Texas for a while, just because that was something really central in Texas. Is there something in Hawaii, a way that your use of the data, how you leverage the data? Is there anything unique to Hawaii? Because I notice you have some extra state-specific standards that a lot of states don't, some very exciting ones, actually.
Oh, well, to answer your first question, really, no. As I said, we're just at the point. We've spent the last couple of years, every time we've tried to do something analytically, say it's a data request from a reporter, they asking about the last couple of years of murders and some demographic things that they're interested. Every time we go down that path, I wouldn't say hit a brick wall, but we uncover a lot, a lot of issues, and it leads to a better understanding of the data, and often sometimes some revisions and corrections, and that's been really it. It's been exploring and understanding the data to gain the confidence to present the data to the public and know what the hell we're talking about. So, and we've spent a lot of time looking at other states, and we found, I think we'll talk about this a bit later as well. But when you look at other states, almost everybody does it differently. When we look at their dashboards, the way things are categorized and counted, the terminology, whether they're focused on offenses or incidents, or if they're talking about offender, it's murky how the data are being managed. When you compare our data to the CDE, it doesn't match up. And there's some obvious reasons for that, depending on which data set you're using. But even then, the FBI doesn't really share their math or their categorization schemes of things, how they're managing the data. So it's really hard. And you say, well, gee, our number looks real different from theirs, but we're pretty confident of ours. I mean, we've spent a week looking at this every way till Tuesday to make sure we're on solid ground, and we are, but we don't know how this other group did their thing, so, and we never will know that. So that's where we're at. We haven't done much analytically. We've been building our repository. I know a lot of other states purchase something from, say, Beyond 2020, and then there you go. They have it, and you have to pay a big bill each year to keep it. We've been building ours piece by piece over these years. So that's really been the focus. We needed to certify our agencies, build a repository. Of course, the mapping piece, there was a 2-year project to map all of our criminal code to NIBRS offense codes, and then build our private dashboard. And that's where we're at now. And so the next piece is the private. So, and we also have 2 of our departments are pretty far behind. Their certification process took a while. The Big Island of Hawaii is maybe 2 years behind in their NIBRS reporting. They're certified now, but they have a big catch-up job to do. So we're not quite at the point of doing a lot as far as publishing NIBRS data. We're just there right now. I mean, that's exactly what we're working on, is our first public crease, other than our rinky-dink, dashboard, which again, let's, not spend a lot of time on that.
That's excellent. No, you did answer my question. One thing I was going to ask Jason, let me actually I was going to ask Jason if you'd like me to just stay with Hawaii, but let me give you a break for a second. So our representative from Ohio, the same question to you. What is the primary way that your SAC is using the NIBRS data, leveraging the NIBRS data? You also have some very interesting state-specific standards. And how has your use of the data evolved over time?
Yeah, so in Ohio right now, we are working on a long-term project with our state-level NIBRS data, and our overarching goal, similar to Hawaii, is to increase public access to data. So the first part of this project involves creating report templates on certain crime topics in SQL, in R, in Tableau. And that is to increase the number of reports and data available on our website. So the whole idea with these templates is that once we have our templates in place, it's easy to update these in the future easily and quickly. So like every year we can go in, we pull new data with our SQL queries. We punch those queries, that data that we get from that into R, and then we're automatically able to get an updated report in a fairly easy way. So we have been working on this overarching format for about the past year and a half. So we've kind of been transitioning to this. So each crime topic that we have decided that we wanted to talk about, we're going to create a full report, and that's created in R. Then we have a dashboard that is created in Tableau. And then we also have downloadable data sets that are available within the dashboard so that you can also replicate the report in infographics as well. So we also are providing a short infographic along with each topic just to kind of give a very quick overview of the findings of our full report, because I will say our reports are still very long and can be on the technical side. And so I think that is one thing that we are still working on improving the template on. So this is an ongoing project, and we do have a few reports and dashboards that are currently on our website. We're almost done wrapping up this stage of the project, and then the next stage involves furthering what was done with this initial phase of the report and dashboard templates in R and Tableau. And we actually want to transition from Tableau to using R for our dashboard so that we're using one program for everything so that we have one smooth process from start to finish. So we think it will be beneficial for our team to be able to do this. This is still a work in progress, but this is part of our upcoming SJS project. So we are also working on a state level data estimation procedure. So we do not have mandatory reporting in Ohio for our crime data. We do have high reporting levels, but we hover right around 85% of the population covered with reporting agencies. So our hope is that we can come up with our data estimation procedures to estimate that rest of that crime to get a better overall picture of the crime trends for the state. Our plan is to use the FBI's method and apply it to the state level.
Which method are you referring to?
The estimation method that they use for their crime stats for NIBRs. So we have reached out to some people from them. We've gotten some documentation on how they are doing the whole process, and we'll be working on that. That is one thing that we have not started yet, but it is part of our project that we are working on. We're also working on putting together a survey that is going to go out to like our criminal justice partners. And the survey is going to basically just ask partners throughout the state what would be beneficial for them in terms of data products that we can provide, because we want to make sure that we're being transparent with our data, but also just being beneficial to our criminal justice partners and especially law enforcement agencies who are reporting to us on a monthly basis. And we want to make sure that we're giving them back products that are helpful to them in the long run. So that's kind of a brief overview of all the different facets of the ongoing project that we are working on right now. And this all just kind of came about with the need, like I said, to be transparent and to just increase the public access to data, especially like on our website, and just kind of make data digestible and easier for people to understand.
That is admirable. And I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
Oh, you're fine.
You got a lot. This is very ambitious and admirable. There are two things you said that I wanted to follow up on, and it also piggybacks off of something that Paul said. First question, you mentioned having a template. And that has to be about the buzziest word I hear almost every conference or workshop I go to. And it's because of this issue that Paul mentioned, which is that there seems to be no single standard of how to report crime data. And I don't know if Derek Weitenheimer is on this call for search, but he will talk to you about this all day long. It's a labor. It's something that a lot of us have been discussing. When you say a template, one thing that I'm curious about is, is it a template in terms of how you're going to count crime? Like in our template, we are going to count incidents, or we are going to count offenses, or are you making those types of decisions on how to standardize a crime report, say for Ohio, an annual crime report? Is that the type of template you're talking about?
Yes. So it's kind of, I feel like there's two parts to it when we're talking about templates, especially for our project. So the first part is, yeah, definitely coming up with a dedicated way that we are doing things. So, okay, we are making sure that we are counting crimes in a certain way, how we are categorizing crimes. Like we've had multiple meetings where we've talked through just how we should categorize certain crimes just here in Ohio as like crimes against society. Should this be listed as an other crime, crimes against things like that? So we're kind of just coming up with like how we want to label and classify everything. So we're documenting all of that. But also just coming up with, I don't want to say like policies, but more just like guidelines of how we are also pulling data from the system itself, because it can be very nuanced and there are a lot of little different data limitations with NIBRS data. And especially when it comes to like missing data or how we are like categorizing age and different things like that. So like a lot of that type of stuff that I feel like we're just trying to have specific guidelines to make sure that we are doing things consistently and not changing up the way we're doing it. And then the second part is just having an actual like coding template that we are using for our programming so that we are also making our reports consistent. So hopefully that answered your question.
It does. It does. Some of the reason why I asked it is because, whenever I go to a conference or a workshop, people will approach us and they'll say, we've transitioned to NIBRS. How do I report my crime rate? Do I just
Right.
stick with part one, which is obviously straightforward and everyone knows how to do it, but that's also not really leveraging what NIBRS can do and showing its value. And so there's been a lot of discussion over, because states have their own needs, and then there's a federal government template. And so that's just something I was curious about, is if states are starting to move, the SACs or the state UCR programs, if they're starting to move on their own and formulating their own template for how they're going to count crime. It's an important question because, and this came up yesterday during the NIBRS discussion, there are competing numbers out there for crime.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, there was a major cities chief report on homicide that showed the number of homicides last year were different than what the national estimates were. And it was because they were counting all homicide, not murder. And
Right.
so they really, like, we had a week of phone calls and emails, right? So those are the types of discussions that are happening. And the reason I asked for, I guess, for my own selfish reasons is because sometimes people say we need federal government direction on this, or not direction, but just inspiration or a model. But other states are
Right.
like, that would be helpful, but we have our own needs too. The other question I was going to ask is, you said that you were coming up with a method for estimate, or you were looking at exploring estimation
Mm-hmm.
and talking to the FBI about their estimation technique. And I know that this is not one of the prompts that I was going to ask you guys, but since we have an audience here, I would be remiss if I just didn't ask a couple of follow-up questions.
Yeah, no.
Another source of confusion out there, again, piggybacking off of, kind of what Paul was saying, some people count crime this way. If you count it as victimizations, the number is going to be higher than if you count incidents and things like that. Another source of confusion that exists is that there are now two different types of estimates being put out. So there's the National NIBRS Estimation Program, where BJS funds that, and we do it in concert with the FBI. They are our partners. We work with them all the time. But that is not the same thing as crime in the US. So when crime in the US came out last fall, that was a different estimation technique where they brought in summary data.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what that estimation technique is. It is not transparent at all. So I was just curious, which type of estimation is it that combination of incident-based data and summary that you're trying to do in Ohio?
So I don't know if I can answer this
And I'm
question
sorry
fully
if I
right now. No, you're totally fine. I just So
But I
we
want people to
had
know
started to
that
work
there
on
is a
this.
distinction.
Yeah, and I think that it sounds like a lot of us were confused with the crime in the US stuff that came out this past year. And I know it took me a very long time to try and figure out where the data was coming from and what tables they were using to create which stats and stuff. Because, like, when that's released, like, we usually have to release a memo kind of comparing it to what we have to be like, oh, okay. And so I remember digging into it and I was like, I don't know what's going on here. We had talked to someone prior to all of that stuff. And so I do not believe that our like estimation model is going to be involving any of the summary stuff either. So we're kind of trying to do something a little bit different. I could be wrong. We have not really spent a ton of time being able to look into this yet because we've had a lot of other stuff coming up. So I don't want to
I
go
believe
too
it.
far down the rabbit hole with it and like say false information. But yeah, I will just say I was also confused, and while our plan is to kind of replicate what we have seen in the past for data estimation procedures from the FBI, like we might have to adjust that based on what is available. But we did get some information that previously, this was last year at some point, where we did get information from them about methods that we should be able to replicate. So we will see how it goes.
Excellent. Okay. I just want to make it clear for the audience that there is a little bit of confusion out there because there is, when we do the national NIBRS estimates, that's just NIBRS data. I mean, we incorporate the summary stuff in their own way, but yeah, it is different. So I was curious about that.
Kimberly, I just have to
Since
share
I-
this anecdote as well. You had mentioned different agencies producing different numbers. The Honolulu Police Department here has launched their quasi NIBRS dashboard. They've used NIBRS offense code, so their NIBRS data are in there. And then what NIBRS doesn't include, they've sprinkled in using state statutes. So there's this strange mix of NIBRS offenses and state offenses, state defined offenses, and there's no delineation between the two. It's just kind of all jumbled up, and we're certain there's some overlap between some of the specific state offense codes and the NIBRS things, and it's not, you can't discern what's been done. So and we're trying to work on a NIBRS dashboard, and we know it's not going to match up with our large police department's dashboard. So that I don't know what we're going to do about that. So and HPD marches to the beat of their own drummer, and they have a proprietary RMS that they've built, and
it's homegrown.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I'm sure, like everybody else, the HPD is down 400 officers and mired in all sorts of scandals and things too, and so working with an agency to uniformly present our NIBRS data, just with our home, they're right literally less than a mile down the road here. Just that is a problem, let alone getting our data to match up to any other states or any kind of, to instill any sort of uniformity to this program is certainly a challenge.
Yeah, I do think.
Saying,
Oh, sorry.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was just thinking about earlier and how you said, I feel like yesterday, like the important topic got brought up in the NIBRS presentation too, which I had made note of this, was, yeah, I mean, there is a lack of the uniformity across like definitions of certain crimes and how we categorize things and how we count things. And I feel like that is definitely something that could be discussed further to try and come up with some more central, I don't know, like ideas or like definitions of things that we're using across the states that are like more beneficial to people when they look at something and they're like, oh, this is what the mass shooting rate is in this state based on this. Like, it's really hard when you have no guidance on certain criteria for those things. So, states are kind of coming up with their own way of doing it. And I mean, states have to do what they need to do, especially for their own needs and stuff. But I do think that there is some guidance that we could get on like a federal basis or some sort of basis on just like definitions of crime in general and just uniformity of how you should be counting crime and like what is violent crime and what is not violent crime and all of that stuff.
We have initiated some of that at BJS. I mean, you can see how shameless plug. We have a tool called Learcat. It's overly complicated. But you can do a lot more with it than you can with the CDE. With us being a statistical agency, we wanted to be able to do things like just cross tabs. And you can go in and create crime rates, because that's, we may need to be able to tell the AG's office in an hour what a crime rate is, right? And so that is a challenge. I guess one of the things I'm curious about is, what would you say is, well, let me back up. You mentioned mass shootings. This is an issue at the federal level too. So we are working on gun violence research statistics with the NIBRS data. We are using a definition, just if this helps folks, we are discussing internally a definition where it's 4 or more victims.
Okay.
Just based on our search of the literature, and that is up for debate. We have not made a definitive call yet. We've done the analyses. We know what it looks like. But what's challenging is it is difficult right now to define a mass shooting because of the lack of data elements in NIBRS. So for example, I think it's in Ohio, you guys actually have if a gun was discharged or if someone was shot, correct?
We have a gunshot wound injury type on the victim table, so we can see that, which that is very helpful. And we had kind of done that in anticipation of NIBRS, so we're hoping that, that will be soon. But
well, they're already implementing it in some states. They're already requiring, I think, and someone from Virginia State Police is probably on this, but I believe Virginia has already started mandating the gunshot wound and the flag for whether or not a gun was discharged. And our hope at BJS is once we have those in place, now that the UCR subcommittee has approved those, now it's time to start formulating a definition and sort of coalescing around it. And if you don't agree with the definition, at least be transparent about it. So for example, at BJS, we've got an analysis of every single violent crime where there were 4 or more victims and a gun was present, and a gun was attached to each of those victims. And in like 75% of those 4+ victim gun incidents, nobody is injured. Nobody. Which is great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's great. But what it suggests is we have no idea what's going on in the vast majority of these. We can't call them mass shootings. Maybe people are missing, obviously, right? Like there's that. But, that's a really, really, really high number. And so hopefully now that they have approved that, we can start to coalesce around a definition. And I think that location codes are probably going to be another area where people are going to have to start to coalesce around definitions and groupings. That is one of the questions we get the most at BJS is how do you decide on grouping your location types?
Oh, okay.
The UCR subcommittee. So BJS finally has we have a seat now at the UCR subcommittee. My unit chief, Erica Smith, is on it. And so if this is how you guys probably already know this, but if it's helpful for folks, they have approved collecting incident addresses and geocodes. My understanding is there is not yet a firm plan in place on how to implement it, but that is something that is in the works. And so that might help on that front as well. Other than these types of definitional issues, I'm curious from a data quality standpoint or even a policy standpoint, what is your single greatest challenge working with the data at the state level? And I'll ask you first since I got you here, Caitlin, and then we'll go to Paul.
Okay. Well, in general, not specific to data limitations would just be having time and people to devote to projects. But past that, when we're looking at some of the data limitations, I think obviously undercounting of crime since we're looking at reported incidents. So that's always one thing that you need to take into consideration. And we know that certain groups of people are more likely to report crimes than others. And so you have to always consider that. Also, the complexity of creating files for analysis, I think, can also be an issue. There's a lot that you need to know about the files and what they mean and what all the tables mean and how to link them all together. And there's different ways that you can pull the files and do this in different programs. And so you need to have experience with certain data programs and an understanding of how that works. And in Ohio, we use SQL Server. So, it does require knowing structured query language in order to pull data. And so that can also be like a learning curve. So I think that is just a challenge in general. And then, I mean, we've kind of already touched on this, but the high use of missing unknown data within the database itself. I mean, we see this a lot with victim and offender demographics, and it's hard to do any type of analysis with that. I mean, we do include victim and offender information in our reports when we're doing them on certain crimes, but a lot of the variables are unknown at the time of the incidents, and that might not get updated once it is known, or it may never be unknown, which is fine. But I mean, I think it's just trying to do outreach to agencies too, to just make sure that we're getting updated information when they get updated information, because that I know is always a struggle for us. And then there's also
I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to that updating issue. Keep going.
And also just default codes as well. Like when values are unknown, I mean, that can lead to misleading results with the default codes, because you might be getting something that looks like you're getting some type of result, but it's not accurate because it's just a default code in the system. And that, I feel like, is also just dependent on all the different record management systems that people have too, and just not having a ton of guidelines or just different ways that they are doing stuff. I see this a lot with the age value, especially for victim and offenders, like how record management systems group age is so different across every single one. And so it can be hard to go through and determine like the actual age that or age range that a victim or offender should be in. And that's something that we always have to do on the front end. And we've kind of come up with our own guidelines for that based on like what we have seen, but it does require kind of going in and looking and seeing how different record management systems are doing it and adjusting from there. So, I mean, I feel like some of these are not necessarily ones that we have really overcome, but it's just a work in progress every day, and just like moving forward and learning the limitations with the data, proper training when it comes to pulling the data and using
Proper
SQL.
training.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that the general public doesn't really understand the pipeline of how this data gets to us.
Mhm.
And that understanding that it happens, at the local level, that drives a lot of this. Paul, let me ask you, in your state, what is the single biggest challenge of working with the NIBRS data? I mean, from just a data perspective, a technical perspective, even political, resource-wise, what's your biggest challenge?
I think I'll mention three, and they're probably the same three that if I were to summarize what Caitlin just shared with us, there's sort of three realms of concerns, and I'll just echo that. But the first, which is where we left off, the missing data. We're at the point now, as I said, we're trying to publicly present our data, and there's things you'd like to be able to do, and the data are a little shaky there. So Michelle Masters presented on that yesterday too, in that group as well. We've done a lot of work in that area. So yeah. On paper, what could NIBRS do for you? And then what are the realities of working with NIBRS data? Can you do the sorts of things that theoretically you'd like to be able to do? Not always is the answer. Relatedly, to really harp on what I was saying before, we're just at the point of gaining the confidence to work with data. We need to be confident that we are on terra firma with what we're about to present. So that's a huge challenge. As I said, everything that we try to do, we learn something, maybe tweak something along the way. So we're very cautious in that regard. So it slows us down. That for sure is a challenge. I would rather not publish anything or be late or something than to be wrong. So, and we have been wrong a couple times in the past with that rinky-dink dashboard that I don't like to talk about. There were some big problems with that initially. Honolulu police, once they saw how they didn't look so good on some things, realized that they had made a lot of errors for about 3 years of data, wanted a chance, to correct it all. They didn't care about it till it was publicly published. Then they cared about it a lot. And we had to take a lot of things down to give them 6 months, I think, to do a bunch of corrections. So those sorts of things are certainly challenges. And a big one, and I think this is the first thing that Caitlin mentioned, and I'll go into this a little bit more, the staffing and the time to do this. As I mentioned, I'm so happy that we have Zoe here. She's a data scientist. She's just exactly what we need, but it's just one person. You know, I'm not a data scientist. I'm an SPSS guy. I'm a criminologist. I know the system really well. I'm not an R guy. I'm certainly not a programmer. Zoe is, and she's really good, but that's one person, you know, and our to-do list is so long that there just isn't time in the day to do everything that you'd like to be able to do. As I mentioned, we're the state SAC, obviously, with the state UCR program, obviously. We do a bunch of other things that have nothing to do with either one of those topics. And there's a bill, they're even closer, about 500 yards down the street is the state legislature, who's in session currently and trying to strap us with not one, not two, but 3 new data collection, data reporting programs with no additional resources. So they strapped us with one last year, a license to carry, a concealed carry report that's due with, again, no additional resources. So those things get inserted into our, shoehorned into our workload. And there's just so much to do just with NIBRS alone. So for sure, that's our biggest challenge, competing resources, competing priorities, more to do than we can get done with what we have today. That's the big challenge.
And this is a common refrain. I mean, when I think about the surveys being done of state UCR programs, I mean, like so many of them have 2 people, you know, maybe 3. And that's even in states where it's required by law to collect NIBRs.
That's us.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
Plus,
it sounds
other
like
5 things we're
resource
required to.
crunch.
That's all legislative. All of these other data, you can't opt out. So yeah, that's a tough challenge.
Is the resource crunch to the point to where you think that it could be affecting your ability? I mean, because that's something that would be good to know at the federal level. If that sort of crunch is so intense, so severe, the resource crunch, that it impacts your ability to, do you think that it could impact NIBRS data quality? The ability to actually execute NIBRS in the way that it's designed and intended?
I would say not the data quality. That's something I'm not willing to sacrifice. So you know, there's quality and there's quantity, there's timeliness. So for me, it's timeliness is the thing that goes, you know. Quantity, you have to do these things, so you can't, and quality, I'm not going to do it, as I said, unless I'm on solid ground. So the thing that where concessions are made is in terms of timeliness.
Yep. And that's where a lot of agencies, not just at the state level, but at the federal level, that is where we get a lot of interest. It is the timeliness issue. And there are obviously discussions about doing monthly crime estimates out of from CGIS and things like that, but the timeliness issue is critical. So, I mean, it sounds like the resource issue is definitely front and center. One of the questions, and I know we've only got about 15 minutes left, and Stephanie kind of touched on this in the presentation she just gave. What are some ways in your state, and I'll start with you, Paul, and I think you've kind of already spoken to this issue, to make the NIBRS data, and this could help on the resource front. I'm always thinking about how to like market NIBRS and remind people, you know, you need NIBRS, you need you need this work and you need to fund it. What are some ways in Hawaii that you could make the NIBRS data more accessible, but also understandable and relevant to the citizens of Hawaii, stakeholders, electeds, in ways that, you know, is accessible to them, that makes sense, that is relevant to their lives? And is it this public-facing dashboard idea? Is that?
That's what we're working on now. Yeah, we're on the outside of that. Well, no, that's not. Well, we do have this private dashboard that we're real happy with, very complex. And so, what do we take from that to pare down and probably change around a little bit? We're hoping to rekindle our relationship with Derek Weitenheimer, who I don't think is participating. I'm looking around the list, but as you mentioned, this is a topic that's near and dear to his heart, and he and I are 2 peas in a pod on that one. So And we were working with him pretty closely prior. He's a busier guy doing other things now, but that's what we're hoping to do is to produce a public facing dashboard that gives you, not everything, but most of what NIBRS has to offer, but in a simple, maybe it's not possible. I don't know. I mean, it seems like NIBRS just inherently presumes some level of understanding, and education just right off the bat. I mean, it's hard to imagine somebody choosing drop-down queries and understanding what it is that they're doing and what it means and what it doesn't mean. And then it ends up in the newspaper. And then they did it wrong. They forgot to, they thought they had the whole state selected, but they changed that filter. This is now just Maui County, but they didn't change it. So now they have a much smaller number of whatever motor vehicle thefts or what, and they publish that as the state number, and then those numbers go out there, they take on a life of their own. It's really hard to correct them later. So how do we make a dashboard that isn't going to cause more harm, than good? And I don't know how so that's what we're wrestling with. So I don't have an answer, but we're very aware of the situation. That's a big concern of ours. Don't have a solution for it yet. Don't know if we will.
Okay, so I'll ask you.
I'm sorry. Let me add one more thing too. Yeah, so this is the SAC group, but there's an ASUCRP group too, and it's great to have SAC. There's these small groups, and there is overlap here. Not a lot, but there's some overlap between SACs and state programs, UCR programs. But collectively, the state UCR programs, I think, should be working harder to standardize and share, understand. Well, this is how we did it, and it's hard to make everybody do it the same way, but to whatever extent we can agree on even a few things, that's maybe a start and the most important thing we could be doing. The SACs can help in that, but I think it's more the state UCR programs working together.
Agree. And BJS really wants to begin engage. I mean, we go to ASUCRP meetings each year, and we try to make it to, the search meetings and things like that to have those conversations. I will just tell you from a personal standpoint at BJS, because the NIBRS data are so complex and there's so much out there, like we don't have all the NIBRS data elements on our public facing dashboard, but we've started a series called Just the Stats, where we may take one simple thing out of NIBRS and it's just one chart. It's just one chart. So one that, I worked on recently was for robbery, where it was just one chart where we wanted the public to see that robbery could have, obviously you have to have the person victim, right, for it to be robbery. But we have so many people who don't even know that you could have a business establishment as the victim too. And so we're just putting out that one graphic so people can just learn that about NIBRS. Just doing it piecemeal like that, because it is overwhelming. And I think, yeah, I hear you. It's a challenge. I would actually like to start a regular working group with folks at these meetings. That's something we can talk about offline. But I was going to ask Caitlin a similar question. What are the ways, Caitlin, that you guys are thinking of in terms of making the NIBRS data more accessible to the public in a digestible, relatable, understandable way?
Yeah, so I feel like we are trying to put up our dashboards to kind of go along with our reports to assist in this. So I did mention that we have a report. It's like right now we're working on reports. We have one on our website on like domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, and we have like an overall crime in Ohio. And then we have a dashboard that is dedicated to just crime in Ohio, but broken down at the county level. And so we have like a statewide dashboard for crime in Ohio, and then we have the county level dashboard to kind of break that down and make it a little bit more, I don't want to say digestible in that sense, but just so that you can see what's going on within the counties as well, instead of just looking at it at a state level. So I think the dashboards help with that, but I do feel like even sometimes our dashboards can be a little bit complex. And if you are not used to looking at it or don't know what data you're looking at, it can be very confusing. So we end up having like a whole list of disclaimers that go along with it and like all this background information. And then it just becomes very burdensome, I feel like, to someone looking at that. And so it's something that we're still working on to, I feel like, how do we make this more digestible to the public? Like, what is going to be useful to them? And we're really hoping that we're going to be able to get some useful information out of the survey that we're doing that will assist us in that, so that we can tailor our data products a little bit more to the general public and our criminal justice partners. But we also do infographics. So we try and have an infographic for each topic as well, so that it's just like one page. We don't do anything over a page, and we just have that information on there. So you can click it, you can see all the different little pictures on there, and just kind of get like a snapshot of the topic of crime. So we are working on that. We definitely have a lot of room to grow, I feel like, in how we are displaying our data. I feel like we've made a lot of progress in the past couple of years of just getting more data out to the public and just having more data, like I said, that is accessible, that is there, just to be transparent. And now I feel like we need a bigger push just to make it a little bit more digestible and easy to understand, because it can be more on the technical side.
Oh, sure. And one challenge too, I mean, for those out there who have a dashboard or who are thinking about designing and implementing a dashboard, one of the challenges also is that so there's a couple of, like, if this helps the discussion, at BJS, we've talked about doing mini dashboards that are topic based, right? Like if it's tied to a report. Right now we have this one big dashboard called Learcat, and some of the things that we've talked about doing is doing these like little 5-minute how-to videos. Like but again, these things cost money, right? Trust me, the quality of video I would make of myself doing a 5-minute tutorial is not what we want, right? So all of this does take resources. So I am sympathetic to that. One of the things that I'm curious about, and Paul, I know you guys are just starting to kind of get your infrastructure up and running in terms of dashboards, is part of the issue that we have run into, and I'm curious if others have run into this in their state, is that when you do stand up a dashboard to be more transparent, to get more public engagement, you will also open yourself up to lots and lots of contacts from people who spot data quality issues.
Oh boy, yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to put that out there.
Why doesn't our thing
Yes.
match up with the FBI's? That's we saw in the FBI. How come their number is different? I two things on that. Here's two tips. I say ask the FBI. I can't explain how, so ask them. We stand by our data. I don't know how any other state does their stuff. I don't know how the FBI does theirs. I know how we do ours. So that's the answer. Two, what's a plausible deniability? I don't look at the CDE. I have no idea what's on there. If they say, how come the number is different? I don't go and look to see what their number is. I don't really care what their number is. So the less
Because
I
you
know,
have your own.
yeah. The less I know about theirs, the easier it is for me to say, I have no idea. Go ask them, because that's a rabbit hole. There's no way every time somebody asks why, and you can explain some things, why, NIBRS is constantly changing every month. A new data file might update old records. And, you can explain that briefly, but beyond that, I don't know. I mean, as I said, the FBI won't share their math. I don't know how they even calculate their stuff. So, just the less I know about that, almost the better for me in a way. If dirty little secret there, perhaps I don't know, but that's one approach. You may wish to consider.
Interesting.
One other thing I was going to throw into a lot of this, and Caitlin was mentioning too. How do we boil it down? And NIBRS is inherently complex and complicated. There's no way around it, and it's difficult to take a inherently complicated concept and summarize it in a clear, concise statement or something. It's like the I believe it was Mark Twain, the famous quote, who famously opened some piece of correspondence to somebody or other with the line something like, "I apologize for the length of this letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." and I think that's
Yes.
sort of it. It's easier to just, here you go, here's everything and all the queries. A lot harder to boil it down in a very simple way than an eighth grader. I always use the example of an eighth grader doing his homework. Hard to turn NIBRS into something for that kid.
That's true. One silver lining that I will say about what will happen, when you do put a public-facing dashboard out, you get all the comments of, you'll get contacted when people's numbers don't match up. But one thing and that too requires resources. I mean, that's a lot of what I do during the week is I have to try to piece apart why some of the numbers don't match up. But one thing I will say, for better or worse, one benefit of having a dashboard, like a large dashboard, one that has a decent level of detail. Okay, so I'm gonna play devil's advocate here, and I know we're running out of time. I apologize. So with our data tool, we have uncovered data quality issues we would have never discovered, never, because it would have taken you can write all the SPSS syntax out. You can, go in SAS and Stata and do all this, but if you go into a dashboard and you need to quickly ask questions. So for example, I went into Learcat a couple of days ago because I needed to get a count of how many law enforcement officers were killed in 2023. And I stumbled across incidents where law enforcement officers were the victims of vandalism and fraud, which is impossible in NIBRS. That's not in the tech spec. I would have never uncovered that without, the behemoth dashboard. So there is I don't know what to do about that yet. And I also found officer victims who were 4 years old. I would have never uncovered that because it's so easy to go in and click. And I verified with the FBI and they were like, yeah, that's accurate. It's this issue of warnings versus errors. And so, I don't want to completely rain on the parade of large dashboards that give lots of transparency and also lots of complexity. There is some bonus to that as well. But the transparency issue and the push for timeliness, it is difficult. And because we're still kind of in this infancy of having NIBRS be, the national standard, we've got a lot more work to do, but I also think that it's very exciting. And I noticed it is 3:26. Jason, would you like to leave some time for questions? Because I noticed a lot of questions in the chat.
Yes. Sorry, Kimberly. We do have some questions in there, so you can go ahead and address those if you want.
Let me find the chat. Let's see. That's interesting. For some reason, I don't see the chat. Oh, yes, I do. My bad. Kim, how do you decide on crime-specific topics for your report? That's a good question. Part of what drives our topics, so right now I'm working a lot on gun violence, sexual assault, intimate partner violence, robbery, lots of gun stuff. Part of it is just what your research area is. So when I got my PhD, I worked a lot on violence against women and sexual violence, and most of my bread and butter was communities and crime work. So I do a lot of subnational NIBRS stuff. And that's the stuff that I love to do that also BJS supports, but a lot of our topic areas are tied to the policy goals and aims and focus areas of the Attorney General's office. So, for example, right now we have a big push to look at, last year we had a big push on anything related to gun violence. In 2020, I believe that was the first year where guns became the #1 cause of death for children under 18. So that was a big push to start doing a lot of gun violence research. So a lot of it is both our personal preference, input that we get from the public. Sometimes it's something in the media. So I did a robbery report because there had been some sort of, I think, questionable things in the media about carjackings, which are just a form of robbery. But a lot of it is directed by what DOJ, sort of policy focus areas are at that time. Another question. Kim, are you aware of any states that audit the NIBRS data quality from LE agencies? I know that there are states that do. When I was at the ASU CRP meetings last fall, and of course I'm blanking on which states they are. I know Wisconsin because I used to manage an NCSX grant for them. They popped into my head immediately. In terms of auditing the NIBRS data quality at the federal level, there are a lot of data quality issues. So the pipeline of how BJS gets the data is every spring. It's after the submission cutoff in April. We get the FBI's database. Like we get the whole operational database, everything. We will still find errors in that data. We find a lot of them. And then because we are not technically we find a lot of, I'm not saying we find rampant errors. I'm just saying we frequently will find them, we flag them, and then we contact CGIS and we talk to them about it. We tell them. So for example, when I found the law enforcement officer victims that were victims of things like fraud and vandalism and stuff like that, I contacted CGIS and let them know. I contacted them and let them know that we had law enforcement officer victims or, that were like age 9 and 4. I am not 100% privy to what the FBI's data validation methods are. We could try to get some more daylight into that, but we have developed and are still developing our own system at BJS because there are things that we catch after we get the data each spring. And sometimes we don't catch it right away. Sometimes it's a user goes to Learcat, our dashboard, and finds it, and then we fix it because the data are massive. We no longer, at BJS, we're supposed to verify every single statistic we put out. You can't do that with a NIBRS dashboard. It's impossible because of all the different permutations that you can, measures you can create with the data. So that is a very good question and to be continued. That is something that we have a pretty rigorous process at BJS. And the reason why is because once we get that data dump from the FBI, we have to produce the national NIBRS estimates. And our contractor that does that with us, RTI International, they have developed an entire system of validation checks that they go through. So there is a lot of that happening. And that then gets married up into what shows up in the BJS Learcat. What I do not know is if issues we find later get changed on the FBI side, which is something we're working through with them because we are very close partners. So I hope that answers your question. Kate, and we are at time. There's still some questions. Oh, hi. Derek says hi. Thank you, Ashley. This is a great question. Paul and Caitlin, do you produce data estimates at the state level to compensate for missing data? And Caitlin already spoke to this a little bit, but Paul, I'm not sure on the Hawaii side.
Absolutely not. And because again, we're in a bit of a different situation than most states. I have 4 police departments, 4 reporting agencies, maybe a 5th. We have a new state Department of Law Enforcement that takes like the Department of Land and Natural Resources and the sheriffs and all these smaller law and combines them. So they may become a 5th NIBRS agency, but we only have the 4. We have 4 counties. So I can't really publish crime in Hawaii without Maui County included. And estimating their data is it would be difficult. They wouldn't want that. Nobody really would want that. If you notice, like crime in the U.S., they don't even tell you which agencies are estimated or aren't. That's a fine print thing that you have to see. Back in the summary reporting system, I used to get those questions all the time. How come you publish this number and crime in the U.S. says this? Well, our number is an exact count. Their number was estimated because one of the 4 agencies didn't submit 12 months of data, and they had that sort of thing. We don't do that. We're as slow as the fastest count. I mean, we're as fast as the slowest county is the way to put it. So until I have all data from all 4 counties, we don't publish anything. That wouldn't work for us otherwise. If I were California and I had 480 law enforcement agencies, there's no way you're going to get them. I mean, you have to take that approach. But for just 4, that would present a whole new set of problems for us.
Yeah, understood. We are a few minutes past time. I don't think I see any other questions. I want to thank everybody for joining this conversation. I am going to put my contact information in the chat, my email, with a request that I hope somebody contacts me after this. I live and breathe NIBRS, and especially data quality. If we had more time, some of the questions I was going to ask is if, from some of the states here, do you see better updating of incident records if you have, if your submission is, XML versus flat file? I love having these conversations. So
Kimberly,
please,
I'm sorry, could BJS play a leadership role going forward in bringing together state UCR programs, SACs, whatever, to come up with some sort of data standardization protocols?
we absolutely can play a role. Yes. I wouldn't say we would lead it. That's above my pay grade. But we have we have the staff. We work with, literally, I work with NIBRS data every single day. And I think about this all the time. And we have been discussing it for 2 years. Thanks, Derek Weitenheimer. So there is interest in that. And I will go back to my unit chief, Erica Smith, and talk to her because she herself has said, we've got to start a working group where we are talking about these things. So for example, one of the suggestions she made is that every year at ASU-CRP, every year at the, a JIRN meeting, at the search meetings, let's have a roundtable, a group where BJS and obviously the FBI, where we get together and we have this conversation. Now the FBI may say, well, that's not our role, that's fine, but we would want to involve them initially. But that is absolutely something we talk about frequently because we're getting all those questions, asking for guidance. So yes, we would like to be a part of that conversation.
Well, thank you, Kimberly and Caitlin and Paul.
Yeah, thank you.
Taking the time to share your experiences and insights on NIBRS with us today. We're going to go ahead and take a break till about 3:45. We'll come back for our final panel on program evaluation. All right, welcome back, everyone. The final session of our virtual winter conference is a roundtable on program evaluation. We'd like to welcome our moderator, Stephen Haas. Stephen is the Director of Research and Evaluation in the Division of Justice Research and Victim Services at ICF. He is also a former SAC Director for West Virginia and currently serves as the Vice President for JIRN. This roundtable will feature discussions from Jessica Reichert from Illinois, Scott Wolf from Michigan, and Kelly Officer from Oregon. All right, Stephen, I will turn things over to you.
All right. Thank you, Jason. As Jason just mentioned, this is a presentation and roundtable on program evaluation. We're going to have each person on the panel discuss a particular program evaluation project. And we're going to follow that a little bit with challenges, talk a little bit about lessons learned, some potential solutions that they may have come up with when performing the evaluation. So one of the things that I want to do is try to just go in the order of the agenda with who might be speaking and give everybody a chance to describe their project first, and then go to the next person to describe their presentation as well. And we're certainly going to try to leave a lot of time for questions, and you can also put questions in the chat. So to begin, I think I'll introduce Jessica. Jessica was with the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. She has over 2 decades of experience And at the authority, she's a senior research scientist and manager for the Center for Justice Research and Evaluation. And she has a great deal of interest in a variety of topics within criminal justice. And so Jessica will be our first speaker. And Jessica, would you like to go ahead and speak about your project?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm from the Illinois SAC, and right now I have 15 staff in my center, and almost all of us are doing program evaluation. That's sort of just become our thing over time. So I'm happy to share what I've learned. So it was hard to narrow it down to one to talk about, but I decided to talk about our biggest one, the Illinois Multi-Site Deflection Initiative. So it's a comprehensive effort to expand police-led deflection in Illinois. And if you haven't heard of deflection, it's kind of like pre-arrest diversion. Law enforcement connect people they encounter to typically behavioral health services or other services and resources they might need, and there was no fear of arrest. So since 2021, this initiative has been spearheaded by the Illinois Department of Human Services, and they fund a team of staff. There's 5 full-time and 2 part-time staff working on this project because there are currently 13 programs spanning 59 counties, and we have 102 counties, so just about half. Yeah, so we've been evaluating it as the Illinois SAC, and I'll speak more to challenges and other pieces of the evaluation. And I'll turn it over to the next person.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. All right, so next we'll hear from Scott Wolf. Scott is the program director for the Michigan Justice Statistical Analysis Center. He's also a program director for the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State, and a great deal of his research focuses on police officer training, evaluation, organizational justice, and police community relations. So Scott, can you tell us a little bit about some of the work that you're doing in program evaluation and talk about the project that you want to speak to today?
You bet. I appreciate it, Stephen. Good to see everybody, or some of you that we can see. Good afternoon. As Stephen said, my name is Scott Wolf. I'm a professor in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State, and so we're one of the handful of SACs that is housed within a university. So a little bit different structure, somewhat smaller. So it's basically me for a small portion of my time, and then maybe a grad student every once in a while that works on projects. But we've been doing some cool stuff over the past couple of years. Most of our work since I took over as director of the SAC here in Michigan, has been involved with the Michigan State Police, that is our state administrating agency. We've done a bunch of work with them over the past few years on trying to get a better handle on understanding racial disparities in their traffic stops across the state. That was kind of at the request of the agency, which is always kind of nice when they come to you instead of the other way around. It makes the partnership a little bit easier to develop. And so the specific project that I want to talk about today during this roundtable was going to the next level, right? A lot of our research in the field, and then ours, in the same way, looks at understanding whether you have evidence of racial disparity, characteristics of that. There's little out there about what to do about it. So conveniently for us, what MSP was doing as part of a larger effort aimed at addressing racial disparities stemming from some of the reporting we had for them was the development of a data dashboard. So they rolled out a data dashboard, or they're getting ready to. We convinced them, it'd be really cool if we could do a experimental evaluation of that, because it's kind of one of the first of its kind. It'd help you all to know whether to keep pursuing it, but also help agencies across the country. So that's what we did. We did a group randomized trial where the dashboard was rolled out in basically half of patrol regions across the state, and the other half went business as usual. Yeah, that's the 30,000-foot view, and then we'll get deeper into it as we go throughout the roundtables. So I appreciate it.
All right, great, Scott. Thank you. Next, we have Kelly Officer. Kelly is the research director for the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. She has served in that capacity for several years, and she conducts a number of different kinds of studies, just like many of our SACs do for the state, in particular about evaluating programs' effectiveness and centering on performance measures for the state as well. So Kelly, would you like to go ahead and tell us a little bit about the project you want to speak about today?
Thanks, Stephen. Hello, everybody. This afternoon for everybody. Good afternoon. It's good to see folks on here. So yeah, for today from Oregon, I was going to share some of our experiences and successes and challenges. We have just wrapped up an effort to evaluate a post-sentencing intervention. It's called the Family Sentencing Alternative Pilot Program. And so for individuals that are on supervision that are the primary caregivers for dependent children, and most have a prison eligible case. And so the idea is if those folks can get intensive supervision and treatment, and then there's also a tie-in with our Department of Human Services. So DHS will provide kind of the family treatment and needs, and then the supervising agency, the individual that's on supervision, focused on their needs, not surprisingly, usually substance abuse treatment, but can tie in some other needs as well. And if that person can avoid that prison sentence, right, that keeps the family together. It's better outcomes for the individual, better outcomes for the family, better outcomes for the children, with some of the foster care impacts there. And so primarily our work is focused on the recidivism outcomes for the person who's on supervision. That's the data we have. We love to measure supervision, but have had a little bit of success on some of the family outcome pieces as well. So I'll get into more of that in the next round.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Callie. So we have a few very interesting projects with some variations among them and so forth. So I think this is going to be very interesting to talk about. I'm sure we'll be encountering, maybe talking a little bit about some of the different challenges, and some of them may be unique to their particular projects, but my guess is many of them will be relevant to some of the other work that other SACs are doing as well. So Jessica, beginning with you and your work with the multi-site deflection evaluation, can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you encountered in your work?
Sure. So first, I wanted to just talk about challenges with deflection in general. It's the nature and complexity of them makes it difficult. So they're voluntary. So participant engagement can vary. They can, I always say they can ghost you at any time. They don't have to do anything, unlike when they're actually in the justice system. There's very little records. You don't want people to have criminal records, but then it becomes very hard to track them. There's also multiple entry points. They say there's 6 different pathways, but some of them are like self-referral, which I've evaluated before, where people can walk into a police station. There's co-responder models. There's post-overdose models. So deflection can come in different ways. And also sometimes different entities. It's usually police, but then they've expanded it to include fire, EMS, even community service agencies like referring them to to a deflection program for services. Also, there can be very diverse interventions. Someone may just, in our programs, some just want a cell phone, which was something they could provide, or they want some food or clothing. But then other people are going to, say a residential substance use disorder treatment. So the intervention, the dosage, very different. And then there's, with these programs, a lot of issues with data sharing and confidentiality. There's HIPAA into play, and the, what is it, 42 CFR, I think is the federal regulation. So that's a challenge. So we're already at a disadvantage here. And then challenges specific to this intervention that we encountered. First, we tried to do pre-post test. Because we knew outcomes were going to be a challenge for some of the reasons that I already mentioned. We picked some validated assessment tools. I will also say one of our programs helps crime victims and one helps the homeless, and the others typically help people with substance use disorder or mental health. So we had to pick different pre-post tests. But we had low completion rates. We were asking, the programs to help us out by giving them out. And then there were just some logistical issues we had. There were some missing gift cards. We're giving people gift cards for taking the pre-post tests, $5. Somewhat missing. And then we proposed to conduct an RCT. So we thought this would be a way we could actually do an outcome evaluation. But if anyone's tried to propose that, which I always give it a shot, but you're usually met with resistance. I usually say, even these police departments have never had this for decades. Now, the chance that a handful of people couldn't get referrals to services is an ethical concern. I understand to some extent, but as a researcher, I really want to do it to be able to give the outcomes that everybody wants. Then we had some issues with administrative data. I'm sure we've all had those issues where there was some lack of detail. There were a lot of unknowns or missing data. So we've worked with the agency that's giving us the data to help clean it up, and it has been a bit, so that's good. And then finally, my team's based in Chicago, and we have, I said there's 13 programs throughout the state. A lot are 8 hours away in the southern part of the state. So one site's in East St. Louis, which is right across the river from St. Louis. So it's very far from Chicago. So those are challenges to try to really be boots on the ground and be a good, partner that's stopping by and having in-person meetings. So we just have to do our best, do a lot of virtual, make the most of any trips we take there. So those are our challenges, and there were a lot of them.
Great. So yes, with any project, you have a lot of challenges and so forth. Just for the people in the audience as well, can you just tell us just what are some of the high level things that you learned about, through the program evaluation, thus far, or if it's fully complete, what were some of the high level things that you learned?
Well, we've learned a lot. I would say some of the strategies to overcome some of those challenges were reevaluating those pre-post tests. Now we're trying to pivot to something different, like more of a brief satisfaction survey instead of trying to get that time 1, time 2, because you could get time 1, the very first time they talked to them, but it's really hard to get a second time. Like I said, this is voluntary, so some people just stopped engaging, and there's nothing you could do about that. One other thing is we built a data dashboard. We're getting lots of ad hoc requests for data. This involves, police and our funder, DHS, and they would need it for different periods of time for their bosses. So we did create a dashboard. It was a lot of work because the person I asked to do it managed to kind of learn it on their own, which was challenging and took about a year. I'm really happy we did it though, so it's great to have. And then some other lessons learned. Yeah, let me see, I wrote some notes. Trying that RCT idea from the very beginning, maybe before they even start taking a first client, and maybe putting that in their ear as soon as possible might have helped. It still may not have, but I'm gonna try to do that early on. And then yeah, I mentioned the pre-post tests. There's also like a real good learning community for deflection. There's different groups. There's PTAC and PARI and International Co-Responder, and being a part of those groups really is helpful to do kind of what we're doing here, where you can talk to other researchers. I'm helping lead this deflection research group. So we can talk about these things and how other people overcame challenges with particularly deflection programs. So those are some things.
Great, very interesting. Yeah, and I want to remind people too that you can put some questions in the chat. I'm not the greatest at this, but I can monitor that. I'm monitoring the chat a little bit, and I think Jason will help me too. But and also, if you want to raise your hand, we can also call on you as well. Thank you, Jessica. Scott, how about you? Can you just give us a little sense for, what you found, I suppose, with your project, and what were some of the challenges associated with performing the evaluation?
Yeah, it's a good question. We had zero challenges. We were talking about racial disparities with cops. It was really easy. Yeah, no, the overarching problem was,
Okay.
buy-in, obviously. Like I said at the beginning, though, it's nice when the agency kind of leads that. And so from the dashboard standpoint, which was kind of the intervention, that was them. They were going to do that regardless whether we were there to evaluate. So that's kind of convenient for us. So for better or worse, we didn't have the challenge of convincing them to do an experiment, like Jessica was talking about, which I've learned is probably a red flag of other challenges to come, in good and bad ways. So I would say one of the biggest challenges we faced was early on in the project was the agency's well-intentioned, their data folks were well-intentioned of, well, let's put together a dashboard. Let's get data on racial disparities and traffic stop numbers in the hands of the troopers and their commanders, right? So let's make this dashboard and make it available. It became clear really early on, and I'm glad they were open to having conversations with us that that was their plan for an intervention. And to me, a data dashboard it's not an intervention for anything, especially to try to reduce racial disparities. And it was hard kind of communicating what my concern was. And basically through repeated contacts in meetings, and the good thing is we had good rapport and regular contact with them before. It's like, well, what are you going to do with the dashboard? What are the cops supposed to do? What are the commanders supposed to do? So moving forward, the big solution to that was, I think one of the things that helped, was an analogy that I used in one of the meetings that kind of seemed to resonate, where I was like, look, you all need a playbook, right? You can't just say, here's a dashboard, and then people are supposed to like be better with their disparity. What is it for? What are we going to try to do? And so that gave way to the actual intervention on paper, which was, okay, we're going to use this data dashboard that has traffic stop numbers, including disparity estimates. We're going to use that. Commanders at each of the patrol regions are going to use those numbers in monthly meetings that they already have with their troopers to talk about other employment related things. And then just add that to the conversation and go over it. If they're an outlier according to the dashboard, have a conversation about why that might be the case. A lot of times it is legitimate reasons. It's assignment, it's area, whatever it might be. And then if there's not, answers readily available to why they have high levels of disparity compared to their colleagues, then go deeper. So that's what ends up being the intervention on paper. And I say on paper because I'm alluding to the fact that, that's a separate question of fidelity then, which became a challenge later on, but that's more of a lessons learned. I don't know if you want to talk about that now, or we can wait till later, Stephen.
Well, I think I find your distinction about, what the numbers are and what do you do with the numbers very interesting, because I many years ago did a statewide racial profiling study for the state of West Virginia when I was a SAC director, and that was really one of the things that I think the legislature struggled with, as well as the law enforcement officers. It was, the collection was required by the legislature. But then once the findings were produced, presentations were given, discussions were had, it's then, well, what do you do to solve the problem? And I find it kind of interesting to hear you talk about, well, giving it back to those commanders and then giving them some sort of guidance on what these numbers mean, how they might be able to change practice in some way or something along those lines. Hopefully, maybe we'll get to hear. Did you hear about anything that, was instituted from some of these commanders that you stood back and said, wow, okay, I can see some action occurring based on.
Yes and no. So part of the intervention was kind of what I would refer to as a soft standard operating procedure change. And by that I mean they didn't actually put it into operating procedure because they were treating it as a pilot. So, from a command staff standpoint, they have the enormous task of not losing their troops, right? Especially when you're talking about disparity and problems with disparities in their traffic stops. And so what they didn't want to do is make it look like they assumed their guys and gals were doing anything wrong. They wanted it as a mechanism to keep being introspective, right? Which is a good message. I think looking back on it, and it's kind of weird as researchers because you get into like ethics of it, of, if there was more teeth to it, I think they would have actually done it. So that's one of the takeaways is the the end story, all the fancy stats aside, is the intervention didn't do anything. We didn't see any change in racial disparities. Luckily for us, we conducted about 40 qualitative interviews with post commanders and troopers, and the rocket science finding from that was, well, they didn't use it. So they didn't use it because the messaging from command staff was, so we're tracking our racial disparity numbers. We don't think you're doing anything wrong, but we're going to do this dashboard. We're going to roll it out as a test. MSU's evaluating it. We don't think you're doing anything wrong. We're not going to do anything employment wise because that's the big thing. That's why I didn't put teeth with it. It's like because that opens a whole new can of worms from an HR standpoint, unions. So it's just a test. And so what we found is really fidelity wasn't there. And going into those interviews, there's a lot. You could talk about the main one was, well, why should we be using this if we don't have a problem? Okay. Right. And so that's an important lesson learned, not only for us, but I think even though you're like, oh my gosh, you went through all this effort to find that, that demonstrates really clearly from a management standpoint, right from the beginning, that you have to have a larger game plan. Going back to the challenge that I mentioned, if you don't have that game plan right from the start, you're gonna fail, regardless of how much potential that program could have had. So that's still an empirical question.
That's great. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Before we're going to go on to Kelly here in a second, but before we go on, we do have a question in the chat about funding source, whether you used NHTSA's 1906 to help.
Yeah, I chatted with her earlier, so yeah, we got that.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. All right, Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about what you found with your study and what were some of the challenges of conducting it?
Sure. Yeah, I laughed out loud at some of Scott's, and then some of Jessica's really resonated also. So I think for ours, I think I'll start with our budget, right? Bare bones. We had to remind people of that along the way, right? So we're doing the best we can with very limited resources. Now, luckily, we've got some kind of data capacity built into our team, which I think is why we were able to do this with such a limited budget. Very qualitative focused, right? And then we were able to get data from the actual programs. And we did have some pretty good sentencing data to do some pretty robust matching work. And so, what was actually produced is pretty cool, right? Pretty robust matched control group with recidivism outcomes that were evaluated. So, hey, that's awesome on a pretty limited budget. So that was a good thing.
Yeah.
But then, of course, the challenges come, right? And so this is a pilot project. It's just a handful of counties that are doing it. Our work shows, hey, there is a recidivism reduction with this program. That's great. Okay, so now we get to the challenges, which is that the results vary substantially across county. We didn't do any qualitative work. We just didn't have a budget for it. We didn't do any kind of process evaluation or fidelity work. So we as researchers can't really tell you why the results vary so much across those counties. Now, we worked with our community corrections department, and so we kind of shared. So first off, they're super excited that there's, a result. They're like, "Yay, we're going to go ask funding. We're going to go ask for funding to get this beyond a pilot. This is awesome." Yay. Reminder, we didn't do any qualitative work, right? We didn't do any of this process evaluation work. So why do you guys think these results vary so much by county? And they go, "Oh yeah, well, that makes sense." So the one county that had the best results has long-standing staff, an awesome program manager. They coordinate well across the different groups. They're doing great, right? Other counties, staff turnover, sometimes doing great, sometimes not so great. And also our control group varies a bit across counties, right? So counties that have really robust supervision practices, maybe not going to see as much of an impact from a program like this. Counties that are struggling resource-wise on their kind of supervision as usual program like this, going to look great. So kind of having to remind our partners here of what we are able to do and not able to do with the budget we have, kind of came back around full circle with the county pieces to it. Data access, of course, is another one, right? We're just looking at recidivism outcomes. I think what folks are probably most interested in is family outcomes, like foster system involvement, that kind of thing. So we have some information on that from our programs, but not from our control group. And navigating that would take a long time and a lot of effort. So I think that's maybe something we could try to take on next time around, I think. And then, yeah, I think too, kind of going back to like that communication piece, right, with the folks that we worked with on this, is that like you get started and everybody's all good and everybody understands what the plan is. And then it's like, we need monthly reminders maybe, right? Of like, no, we can't go do interviews. No, we can't do a fidelity study. Yeah, we need all that stuff, but we can't do that right now. And so this is what these are the questions we're gonna be able to answer. And then this stuff either comes later or, we got to do round 2 or something like that. So, it gets a little windy sometimes, in that regard.
Yeah, so, if I hear you correctly, you had some positive outcomes. It was a pilot. You had partners involved and so forth. Is there any plans for, how you're taking this information? You said, some places where you saw greater reductions in recidivism, there are certain things in practice and in play. Is that information being shared across the counties? Is it one of your partners' responsibilities to sort of develop that a little bit?
I think so, Stephen. This we're going to kind of take away with like a lessons learned piece, right? Of like, it's okay to be iterative. Sometimes it's a multi-step effort. So I think the first step here is, the first positive step is, hey, we found positive outcomes. There's an effort to go fund this beyond the pilot stage. So that effort's happening right now. We'll see how that goes with our lovely legislative budgeting session. So assuming that happens, right, then regroup with our community corrections folks. One, to figure out, does it go statewide? Do you just double the number of programs? What does that look like? And then we can kind of do phase 2 of like, okay, now it's time to do some fidelity work of, why did we get such great outcomes in this one county? If it was just because supervision is normal is really not good, what do we have here? Or is it really the way this case management is working and the way the DHS partners are coming together? If we can get some more solid information about that and then figure out how to spread it to the new programs, hey, now we're actually doing something here. But that will definitely have to be kind of a phase 2 effort to come from that. And then if we can get, some of the DHS data sharing worked out on the the children's outcomes or the family outcomes, that could be pretty robust too. So that'll give us a little more time, maybe a little more manpower to keep kind of trying to take that effort on there. So
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot of work on coming up to do to learn a little bit more about what made some places more effective than others.
I'm just going to follow up on something that was just said, and it's kind of good we have different kinds of evaluations here because because of my challenges, mine are all qualitative. And it's lacking the quantitative. So I didn't say what our methods were. We've done field visits, field observations. We've done interviews with staff, community partners, and to some extent clients, but that has also been a challenge. And we've certainly looked at administrative data. We've done a collaboration survey because for these programs, collaboration is super important with police and community partners. We've done some training surveys, and we might just do an evaluability assessment because we want to explain why we can't really do the outcome evaluation by saying these things aren't in place to be able to do it, because everybody wants outcomes, or they want the cost benefit, which is super challenging to do. I'm always almost scared to do them because there's so many factors that come into play and limitations. And I also wanted to follow up that it is an iterative process, because you make these proposals or plans, and then you don't, and for these programs I'm talking about, they were just developing. So you have to be able to be flexible and kind of change as you go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I understand your concerns about cost benefit, because whenever you start talking about numbers, people start to listen. You can present all the findings in the world, but then as soon as you start to put a dollar figure to it, everyone focuses on that, right?
Right. And did they read the limitation section? Because there's usually one there that kind of needs to be looked at.
Right. Sounds like a great step to think about an evaluability assessment, because that's the other thing. I imagine maybe each of you could, have your own experiences with this, but if you're working with a lot of committees or other kinds of stakeholders and so forth, they've got a lot of great ideas, but when push comes to shove, it's sort of like, well, where would we get this data from? I mean, is this data collected? Are you collecting it? What would we need to do that sort of thing? And also it can serve as an educational opportunity to an evaluability assessment to help people understand that maybe we need to start collecting certain kinds of information if we want to ask certain questions and get answers to certain questions, right? Okay. All right, we'll give you a break, Jessica. Here, Scott, we're talking about your project and so forth, and talking about some of the challenges you encountered, or with this? I know some of them are maybe not real tangible, in some cases, because you're dealing with just maybe a lot of opinions and attitudes about what's happening and how to use the information and all of that sort of thing. But did you find yourself being able to overcome some of these or make some inroads on some of these? And is there something that you might do different next time, or a few things you might do different next time to just kind of improve the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, it's interesting to me. I mean, part of it's because I was biased and it's kind of the lens I was looking at what was going on. But a lot of other research I do involves like organizational justice and employee relations in police settings. And so it struck me, not building off what I was saying earlier, that what was clear to me was in order for anything to be successful of that in relation to any type of intervention aimed at changing policing, whether it's disparities, use of force, or whatever, it has to come from top down in terms of not only game plan but adequate messaging to the people, right? So it was a bit of a mixed signal, and I get that it was a really difficult thing to kind of a tightrope to walk, a mixed signal from command staff saying that, look, we're not saying anything's wrong, but we want to know more about disparities, and so this is one step in that direction. That became confusing then when they were asked, pretty please, but yeah, you have to do it type of message to use the dashboard, but then no follow-up. So all of that's to say that I don't know if I don't think I would want to do a project differently in the sense of having more control over us, like from a researcher side, being responsible for the deployment of an intervention like that. But I think it's not that I would do something differently. I would take these lessons learned and use them as empirical evidence, without using that term, with future command staff of saying, look, here's why I know you have to do something, right? There's a report that just went out that says there's disparities in Michigan State Police. We got to do something now. And actually last week we got to do it, right? And so, but you have to pause, right? You have to take that really slow, because the well-intentioned effort of playing it soft actually backfired. And so in our interviews, they lost a lot of their troops because of that mixed messaging. I think it would have been better for them if they were a little bit more blunt. So that's what I would have a conversation with moving forward.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
How about you, Kelly? So anything that you want to say about things that you, feel like you maybe faced and, worked to overcome, and maybe anything that you learned from that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll give an example, and then actually I had a question, and then I want to ask Scott a question too. I think we got time for that. But and it feeds into a little bit to what you were describing there, Scott. So this program that we evaluated, it actually started as a pilot program with legislative funding. So there was a push from a legislative committee at the time that, hey, we need to do this, and it's a pilot program, and let's do it, and then we'll see if it's working, and then decide what to do from there. COVID happened. Things got a little crazy. So now it's time to decide, hey, is this going to have the same funding, more funding, less funding? How's this all going to fit in? But really the push came from a legislative, right? Desire in that way. And then of course, several counties stepped in and said, hey, we've been wanting to do this for years. We'll be a pilot. We'd love to. Let's do it. It'll be great. And so it provides some of that, provides the funding, and then it provides a little bit of that oversight and a little bit of a like, hey, if you want to keep doing this, you got to come back to that body and ask for more money, and you got to be ready to do that. So Scott, to your point, right, of talking through the challenges with the law enforcement agencies, I mean, it sounds like a lot of it was internal. Like, was there any legislative questions or legislative pressure around some of that. I mean, sometimes that can kind of help to move things too, although it may work in the opposite direction of like something's being forced down their throat they don't want to do. So I'm just curious on the dynamics there.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah. I wouldn't say legislative pressure per se. They work at the head, especially the colonel is appointed by the governor. Um, so that pressure is always there to be progressive with whatever they're talking about. But public pressure from years of, different lawsuits that every agency is going to face. Um, they were proactive in a sense, but also the external pressure is pushing them to do something too. Now, not later.
So it sounds like, it's difficult in both of your projects and maybe all three that you just sometimes it's difficult to get action on things without some.
Well, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, not to brown nose my partner too much, but it's rare, as a lot of for an agency to be willing to partner on a project like racial disparity, let alone do a randomized controlled trial, let alone like engage in like a multi-point strategy to address racial disparities. So that level of progressiveness is I've worked at a lot of agencies across the country, really good agencies. That was a little unprecedented. So all those lessons learned I talk about, yeah, I think we're inherently like pessimistic as researchers. We always look for the gaps and lessons learned, right? We want to make it better. I get that. But they did their best and they were definitely well intentioned. It wasn't like they weren't trying to do something. They just work on a different schedule than us, certainly in academia working on. So they wanted to do something, and we learned that that's probably worthwhile to slow down a little bit and have a better game plan.
Okay. All right. So I guess, uh, I guess something that maybe we could try to do is see if there's any, I'm not picking up anything in the chat, but I want to encourage people to ask a question or even raise your hand if you'd like to ask it verbally. Feel free to do that. So, one question I guess I have for maybe you, Scott, is the fact that when you've got these dashboards, you've got what the numbers are saying and so forth. Do you think there's going to be any opportunity or any sort of willingness or something to allow for sort of a deeper dive in a place or two or a few places where you might have seen greater disparity occurring to find out a little bit more, sort of what was happening that may have
Yeah.
some of these things?
Yeah, great minds think alike, I guess. Yeah, that's been one of our kind of strategies all along, starting back in, I think I started working with them in 2021 on disparity type stuff. And it was kind of not necessarily like this, 5 or 6 year plan, but let's start small and let's keep diving deeper and deeper as long as they want to keep going. So, yes, to a certain extent. Do I don't know. I really haven't asked, to be honest, of whether they're interested in doing another evaluation of the dashboard per se, but they have definitely been interested in continuing to do deeper dives into understanding the nature, characteristics of racial disparity. So right now, what we're working on is kind of like spatial concentration and distribution across the state. For lack of a better term, hotspots of disparity, to kind of zero in somewhat what it sounds like you're asking, Stephen, of those areas that are a little bit hotter with disparity than others, because you can't address everything and it's a complex issue. Lots of factors that go into explaining why those disparities exist, and then very little information to go on of, well, what do we do if it's this causal factor? What do we do if it's this? What do we do with that? So I have some awesome grad students that are actually kind of working on that now, try to add to that literature.
Great. Yeah, it's like research never ends, right? So you find something and then you have to kind of sort of look into it a little deeper sometimes to maybe be able to explain a few things. And like I said, it's such a challenge to to know what to do with the disparity when you find it. So I think that's something there. So I guess maybe a question, building off Scott's response too, and I'll go to Jessica, is just what do you see as your next steps in, either just improving upon this project or a future project from something that you learned here? Or what is your next steps for going forward if you're going to do more research in this area or do projects that are similar? Is there other things that you want to do or build on?
I'll answer. We're in year 3 of a 3-year contract, and we're about to get another 3-year contract, so we will be continuing. So we definitely want to do that evaluability assessment idea. We also want to do a scoping review of deflection. It's still a relatively new field. There have been some reviews that focus on pre-arrest diversion with deflection, so we think it might be time to do a dive into just deflection, so that would be exciting. It's sort of tangential to doing this, but what else do we want to do? We definitely want to get more client voices and do more interviews with them. I know we have more plans than that. All these programs did an action planning process, so at least a few days really planning it out with community members. So we have many separate reports on each of those instances of action planning. So we wanted to kind of write up one paper that summarizes all of them. Maybe even I saw there's an implementation science journal. So it would be perfect for that. So that's something I want to work on when time permits. But I think there's a lot of ways we can go with this because we have so many programs and a lot of data and more things to explore. And I'm still hopeful for some sort of outcome evaluation someday.
Well, it's a great start to be able to compile information to inform future planning, right? And implementation, which sounds like that's on your radar. And again, the evaluability assessment can complement that, maybe help you find, some feasible ways to potentially evaluate it, but, maybe set up some, if needed, some data collections or other sources to allow for that evaluation in the future as you go forward. But a great place to go forward, right, is always with just improving the implementation that's there, right? So that might be helpful as well. How about you, Kelly? Anything that you'd like to say? We've got about 10 minutes to go. I'm looking, I don't see other questions, but I wanted to ask you, what do you see as something that you want to, you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what do you want to do next? And what do you anticipate you'll do maybe potentially differently as you go forward?
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. I like that saying, right? The work never stops. So, and actually I was thinking too, kind of right to Scott's point, to think about how, we're always trying to problem solve. And so we forget the progress we've made sometimes, right? I mean, I think the reason we were able to do this in the first place, right? We did a ton of like recidivism work, right? Developing like a recidivism tracking and consistent access to those data sources, like 2015-ish, right? So we have that base there. We have the relationships with like the data owners, but then also the relationships with like these supervision agencies, like those were already in a good place. And so then that made taking on this project not as much of a hill to climb, right? We were already there. Staff with the skills to do this pretty robust, like qualitative work, right? We've made some growth in those areas. And so all that sets you up to then be able to do this project that was done on such a small budget. So that is pretty cool. So yeah, I think the next step is like trying to figure out the data sharing with DHS, which when you're talking about child foster care outcomes is going to be a challenge, but it'll be worth it, right? Like we can figure that out. We can try to take that on, kind of working through that piece of it, and then yeah, building in that qualitative piece, right? Like, and I think to Jessica's point too, like there's more to untangle just with how these programs operate, but then also the client voices. I mean, there's probably some really valuable qualitative information in there that you just got to figure out the plan, right, to pull that together. So yeah, I'd like to move in those directions.
Okay, thank you for that. So just to kind of round out our discussion and so forth, I guess I could go back to Scott here. Is there a final thought or something you'd like to maybe leave us with that would help other program evaluators, whether it's racial disparity or not, or that topic, something that you might just want to share to say, this is something that would be helpful in the future, to think about when you're doing this kind of work or program evaluations.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I have any like super brilliant words of wisdom, especially that nobody else isn't aware of. But the first thing that comes to mind with that question is make sure you continue to always cultivate that relationship with whoever the agency is you're working with. Even if you don't think they're going to be interested in doing something grand like an experiment or whatever, that trust is really important. This is something, especially being at a university and having students that we preach a lot to our doctoral students in particular is don't intentionally make them look bad for your own benefit and your own clicks on social media and everything. Always keep that in mind. Don't hide data, of course, don't be shady, but think about establishing that trust and that relationship first, then go to them with the offer to help them answer questions, as opposed to, hey, can I do this really, really complicated long-term experiment that I'm going to come back and tell you we need more research. Yeah, it's always it's really tricky. So yeah, care about the people is the short answer.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with that who's done this for a while. It's sometimes, whether it's not your fault or somebody or anything, but there's a general sometimes distrust about evaluators that just exists. And some people have it more and some have it less, but cultivating that relationship and developing trust. And I like your idea about asking them about what kinds of things they want to know. What are their needs can be helpful too if you have that opportunity to do that. How about you, Jessica? Is there something that you'd want to say that from a program evaluation standpoint that you would sort of pull out as a final thought?
Yeah,
That'd be helpful.
I'll say, you're probably going to make some mistakes. You're probably going to have to problem solve. You probably will have to pivot, and that's okay. It happens most of the time. And that, if you're really able to offer those recommendations to have a program make improvements, then you feel like it's all worth it, and you feel like you're making program improvements that will ultimately better benefit the citizens of the state. So fortunately with this project, kind of as Scott was talking about, we became really, I think, really good partners, and part of the team is always the thing we want to do, and we always want to give information back quickly rather than waiting for some gotcha report, a year later. So I think that's really benefited us to really have them listen and make changes. And actually the agency we're working with, on their own developed this Excel spreadsheet, all the recommendations we've offered and how they've addressed it. And I've never had that happen before. So I guess we must be doing something right. So I don't know. And I'm here to help anybody who might need a ear or some advice going forward.
You know, what strikes me is just hearing Scott and now you, Jessica, and your points, you know, it just really tells us or kind of highlights how, you know, a lot of times we as scientists think about data, we think about analytics, we think about all those things, but to be a good program evaluator, particularly within the criminal justice system, and, you know, where there's some, you know, a lot of different emotions and politics associated with things as well, that, you know, you have to be, you have to take into consideration relationships, how you communicate, you know, information sharing back, you know, keeping it going and things like this, just to continue to keep everyone on board and feel that they want to continue to participate, right? Any final thought, Kelly? We've got just a couple of minutes left.
Thanks, Stephen. Final two. I agree with Scott and Jessica, right? Relationships, be patient with yourself. Uh, Jessica too, right? The idea of like, if you do have some kind of negative results to share, you just gotta lean in with that group, right? Meet with them ahead of time, talk about it, do some extra breakouts, dig into a little bit. They'll know that you were with them along that journey, right? And maybe they're on their way to figuring it out by the time you know, publicly release. And it can be a good thing, right? To Scott's point, it can force that change that they maybe didn't want to do without kind of those tough findings.
Great. All right. So this was a very informative panel and wasn't just about outcome measures and data collection and things like this. It really shows how much is involved in order to pull off a good program evaluation and maintain a relationship. So, Jason, I'll hand it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Stephen, Jessica, Scott, and Kelly. We appreciate you taking time to speak with us today about your program evaluation projects and sharing what you've learned along the way. On behalf of JIRN, I'd like to thank our moderators, panelists, and all of you for attending over the past 2 days. We hope that you found the discussions to be informative. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a good evening, everyone.